Sand, smoke, steel. February 26, 1991. The vast Iraqi desert stretched before Captain Richard Harmon like an ocean of death. Through the thermal sight of his M1A1 Abrams tank, the world transformed into ghostly green shapes against black emptiness. His ears filled with the mechanical symphony of the 1,500 horsepower turbine engine, the squawk of radio chatter, and the rhythmic breathing of his crew. "Target identified, T-72, 2 o'clock, range 1,800 meters, called Jason, his gunner. "Confirmed," Harmon replied, his voice eerily calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Fire when ready." The 120mm main gun roared, sending a depleted uranium sabot round downrange at over a mile per second. Through his commander's sight, Harmon watched the Iraqi tank erupt in flames, its turret violently separating from the hull in a catastrophic explosion. Target destroyed, scanning for new threats. This was the infamous 73 Easting engagement, where Harmon's Eagle Troop of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment was making history. 9 American tanks against an entire Iraqi Republican Guard battalion. David versus Goliath, except David had the technological edge. "Multiple contacts, 11 o'clock, shouted Marcus, the loader. "Identified," confirmed Jason. 3 T-72s in defensive positions. "Engage the nearest target," Harmon ordered, swinging his sight to cover their flank. Another thunderous report from the main gun. Another Iraqi tank destroyed. The battle was unfolding with brutal efficiency. In the confined space of the turret, Harmon could smell the cordite, the sweat, the unmistakable metallic scent of war. "Movement on our 6, called Samuel Thompson, Harmon's trusted driver. Possible flanking attempt. Harmon pivoted his thermal sight. "I see them. 3 BMPs trying to work around our right." He keyed his radio. "Eagle 6, this is Eagle 2-6. We have mechanized infantry attempting to flank our position. Request permission to reposition." "Eagle 2-6, this is 6, negative. Hold your position. We need your fire support on the main line." "Roger that." Harmon switched to internal comms. "Thompson, keep us hull down behind this berm. Jason, let's deal with those BMPs before they become a problem." The engagement continued with methodical precision. 9 minutes into the battle, their kill count was already in double digits. The Iraqi forces, despite their numerical advantage, were being decimated by superior American technology, training, and tactics. Then disaster struck. A tremendous impact rocked their tank. Warning lights flashed across Harmon's control panel as the acrid smell of electrical fire filled the compartment. "We're hit," Thompson shouted. "Right side, engine compartment." "Status report," Harmon demanded. Already moving to the fire suppression controls. "Engine still running, but we're losing hydraulic pressure," Thompson reported. "Fire in the engine bay, automatic suppression activated." In that moment, Harmon faced the iron triangle of tank warfare in its most personal form: firepower, protection, and mobility. They still had their gun, their armor had saved them from what should have been a killing blow, but their mobility was compromised. "Eagle 2-6, this is 6, report status over." 6-2-6, we're operational but damaged, hydraulic system compromised, request permission to withdraw for repairs. Negative 2-6, we need every gun on the line. Republican Guard reinforcements incoming from the north. Hold position until relieved. Harmon looked at his crew, saw the determination in their eyes, understood, 2-6 out. What followed was 23 minutes of pure combat intensity. Their damaged Abrams, partially immobilized, became the focal point of the Iraqi counterattack. Harmon's crew fought with the precision of a Swiss watch, engaging and destroying target after target. When an RPG team appeared on their blind side, it was Thompson who spotted them through his driver's viewport. "RPG team, 3 o'clock, 50 meters, he shouted. Harmon swung his .50 caliber machine gun, but too late. The RPG was already in flight. Thompson made a decision that would haunt Harmon for decades. He shifted the tank using the strongest frontal armor to absorb the impact, directly exposing his driver's compartment to the brunt of the blast. The explosion rocked the 67-ton behemoth. When the smoke cleared, Harmon looked down to see Thompson slumped in his seat, his chest a ruined mass of blood and shrapnel. Man down, Harmon shouted into the radio. "Need immediate medical assistance." But deep in enemy territory, with the battle still raging, help wouldn't come soon enough. Thompson looked up at Harmon, blood bubbling from his lips. "Tell Michael," he gasped, his voice barely audible above the chaos of battle. "Tell him I'm proud. Thompson's eyes fixed on some distant point, life draining from them even as Harmon desperately applied pressure to the wounds. "Stay with me, Sam. That's an order, soldier." But some orders cannot be obeyed, even by the most loyal of men. The rest of the battle passed in a blur of mechanical movements in cold, calculated vengeance. When Eagle Troop finally secured the area, the tally was staggering. 28 Iraqi tanks, 16 armored personnel carriers, and numerous other vehicles destroyed. One of the most lopsided victories in modern military history. But for Captain Richard Harmon, it had come at an incalculable cost. 34 years later, the Texas sun beat down on Harmon's weathered face as he stood among the rows of restored vintage tanks at his small museum outside Fort Hood. At 62, his hair had turned silver and deep lines marked his face, each one earned through decades of service and sacrifice. But his posture remained military straight, his blue eyes sharp as they had been in the desert 3 decades earlier. "The M4 Sherman," he explained to the small group of veterans gathered around him, his hand resting on the olive-drab hull of the restored tank. Perhaps the most famous American tank of World War II. Not the best armored, not the most powerful gun, but reliable, available in numbers, and most importantly, it got our boys home. A young veteran raised his hand. But wasn't the Sherman outclassed by German tanks? The Tiger could take out a Sherman from over a mile away, but the Sherman needed to get within a few hundred yards to penetrate a Tiger's armor. Harmon smiled, a professor pleased with a thoughtful question. "That's the popular narrative, son. The reality is more complex. Yes, the Tiger had superior frontal armor and a more powerful gun, but war isn't fought on paper. The Sherman was faster, more reliable, easier to maintain, and we could build 10 for every Tiger. That's the iron triangle of tank design: firepower, protection, and mobility. Every design is a compromise." He patted the Sherman's hull affectionately. "Perfect balance isn't achievable, but finding the right balance for your strategic needs, that's the art." After the tour concluded, Harmon retreated to the small office adjacent to his workshop. The walls were lined with photographs, medals, and mementos from a lifetime of service. 3 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star for valor in combat, unit citations from Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. But the item that held his attention today was a worn, leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Inscribed on the cover in fading ink, Captain Samuel J. Thompson, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Harmon flipped through pages filled with meticulously drawn tank schematics, battle formations, and personal observations about armor tactics. Sam's wisdom, preserved in ink and paper. A legacy Harmon had protected for more than 3 decades. "Still can't let it go, can you?" Harmon looked up to see Marcus Williams standing in the doorway. Now in his 60s, like Harmon, Marcus had been their loader in Desert Storm, had witnessed Thompson's sacrifice firsthand. After retiring from the Army, he joined Harmon in running the tank museum. "Some debts can never be repaid," Harmon replied, closing the notebook gently. "You know what Sam would say if he could see you still beating yourself up after all these years?" Harmon nodded. "He'd tell me to focus on the mission, not the past." "Damn right he would." Marcus settled into a chair opposite Harmon's desk, the leather creaking under his weight. "So why the walk down memory lane today?" "Just thinking about balance, the compromises we make." Marcus snorted. "You sound like you're preparing another lecture for those ROTC kids." The conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, Harmon watched a black government SUV pull up to the museum entrance, followed by a military police escort. "Were you expecting the brass today?" Marcus asked, rising from his chair. "No," Harmon's brow furrowed, "but I recognize that vehicle." Before either man could speculate further, a sharp knock sounded on the office door. Marcus opened it to reveal a soldier in dress uniform. "Colonel Richard Harmon?" the young man asked. "Retired," Harmon corrected. "What can I do for you, Lieutenant?" "General Hayes requests your presence, sir. He's waiting in the vehicle." Harmon exchanged a glance with Marcus. William Hayes was the current commander of the Army Futures Command, responsible for modernizing the Army's equipment and tactics. They had served together in Iraq, but hadn't spoken in years. "Tell the general I'll be right out." After the lieutenant departed, Marcus raised an eyebrow. 3-star generals don't make house calls to retired colonels without a reason. "No," Harmon agreed, retrieving his cane from beside the desk. An old injury from his final deployment to Iraq sometimes made walking painful. "They don't. General William Hayes emerged from the SUV as Harmon approached. Despite being roughly the same age as Harmon, Hayes looked a decade younger. His uniform immaculate, his posture perfect. "Dick," Hayes said warmly, extending his hand. "It's been too long." "Bill," Harmon replied, accepting the handshake. "To what do I owe the pleasure of a visit from the head of Futures Command?" Hayes gestured toward the SUV. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" Inside the climate-controlled vehicle, Hayes dismissed his aide, leaving the two old soldiers alone. "You've done well for yourself," Hayes began, nodding toward the museum, teaching the next generation about armor history. "Just trying to make sure the lessons of the past aren't forgotten." Harmon studied his old comrade's face. "But I suspect you didn't drive all the way from Austin to discuss my retirement hobby." Hayes smiled thinly. "Direct as always." He reached into his briefcase and removed a tablet. "What I'm about to show you is classified. Top secret." He handed the tablet to Harmon, who found himself looking at technical specifications for what appeared to be a new tank design. The designation caught his eye immediately: XM-1A5 Abrams Next Generation. "The Army is developing a new main battle tank?" Harmon asked, scanning the preliminary specs. "More than that. We're reimagining the future of armored warfare." Hayes leaned forward. "The battlefield is changing, Dick. Our potential adversaries are developing systems that could neutralize our traditional advantages. We need something revolutionary." Harmon continued examining the specs, his experienced eye noting the proposed power-to-weight ratio, the advanced composite armor, the next-generation fire control system. But something troubled him. "This design prioritizes speed over protection," he observed, "reducing armor thickness by 30% to achieve higher mobility." Hayes nodded. "Our analysts believe the future battlefield will demand greater tactical mobility, the ability to rapidly deploy, engage, and relocate. Traditional heavy armor becomes a liability in that environment." "Speed as a form of protection," Harmon mused, remembering similar arguments throughout armored warfare history. "It's been tried before, Bill. The results were mixed at best, catastrophic at worst." "This isn't the British cruiser tanks or Soviet BT series," Hayes countered. "We have technologies they couldn't dream of: active protection systems, reduced thermal and radar signatures, predictive threat analysis." Harmon set the tablet down. "Technology fails, especially in combat. When it does, armor thickness becomes the difference between soldiers coming home or not. That's exactly why I'm here." Hayes retrieved the tablet, his expression serious. "The design team is brilliant. Top engineers, ballistics experts, material scientists, but they lack something crucial." "Combat experience," Harmon supplied. "Precisely. They understand the theory of the iron triangle, but not the reality." Hayes paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The project director specifically requested you as a consultant. 3 months, possibly 6. Your expertise could be invaluable." Harmon's eyebrows rose. "The project director requested me by name. Who's running this show?" "Lieutenant Colonel Michael Thompson." The name hit Harmon like a physical blow. His hand instinctively moved to his chest, where an old wound suddenly seemed fresh again. "Samuel Thompson's son," Harmon said quietly. It wasn't a question. Hayes nodded. "He's made quite a name for himself. MIT graduate, brilliant engineer, rising star in Futures Command." "Does he know?" Harmon asked, his voice barely audible. "About me, about what happened to his father?" "He knows his father died heroically in Desert Storm," Hayes replied carefully. "Beyond that, I'm not sure what he's been told." Harmon turned to look out the window, toward the Sherman tank standing proudly in front of his museum. Samuel Thompson had been 27 when he died. His son Michael had been only 4 years old at the time. "I promised Sam I'd look after his family," Harmon said finally. "I sent money for Michael's education, kept tabs on him from a distance, but I never had the courage to face him." He turned back to Hayes. "Why now, Bill? Why bring me into this?" "Because the Abrams Next Generation is the future of American armored warfare," Hayes said simply. "And I want to make damn sure we get it right. The lives of our soldiers depend on it." He paused. "And perhaps it's time for old debts to be settled." The implications hung in the air between them. A chance to fulfill a promise made 3 decades ago. A chance to honor Samuel Thompson's sacrifice by ensuring his son's project would protect future generations of American tank crews. "When do I start?" Harmon asked. "Tomorrow, Aberdeen Proving Ground." Hayes handed him a security badge. "The team is expecting you at Aero 800. As Hayes prepared to leave, Harmon stopped him with a question. Does Michael know I'm coming? He knows we're bringing in an experienced combat advisor, Hayes replied. Not specifically who. He studied Harmon's face. Will that be a problem? Harmon thought of Samuel Thompson's notebook, filled with wisdom about tank design and tactics. Wisdom his son might need. No, he decided, no problem at all. After Hayes departed, Harmon returned to his office where Marcus waited expectantly. Well, Marcus prompted. Harmon explained the situation, watching his old friend's expression shift from surprise to concern. Sam's boy, Marcus said thoughtfully. Last I heard, he was at West Point. Graduated with honors, then MIT. Harmon sank into his chair. Now he's designing the next generation of American tanks. And you're going to work with him. Marcus shook his head. After avoiding him for 30 years. I didn't avoid him, Harmon protested. I kept my distance. There's a difference. Semantics, Marcus waved dismissively. Question is, what are you going to tell him about his father? Harmon had no answer. That evening, as sunset painted the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Harmon sat on his porch, Samuel Thompson's notebook open in his lap. The photograph tucked in its pages showed two young men in desert camouflage, standing proudly before an M1A1 Abrams. Harmon and Thompson, brothers in arms, captured in a moment of camaraderie just days before the fateful battle. Harmon traced his finger over Thompson's smiling face. Your boy's all grown up, Sam, designing tanks just like you dreamed. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 decades of memories. I hope I have the wisdom to help him, the courage to tell him the truth. In the distance, a military transport plane roared overhead, a reminder of Fort Hood's constant activity. Tomorrow, Harmon would be on a similar flight to Maryland, to Aberdeen Proving Ground, to face the son of the man who had saved his life, to face his past. Aberdeen Proving Ground sprawled across nearly 72,000 acres of Maryland countryside, its facilities a testament to America's commitment to military technological superiority. As Harmon's military transport approached the Advanced Combat Vehicle Development Center, he was struck by how much had changed since his last visit 2 decades earlier. The gleaming complex of laboratories, test facilities, and simulation centers represented the cutting edge of armor development, robotic manufacturing systems, digital design studios, virtual reality battle simulators, all focused on creating the next generation of American fighting vehicles. A young lieutenant met Harmon as he disembarked from the transport. Colonel Harmon? Lieutenant Rodriguez, sir. I'll be your liaison during your stay with us. She gestured toward the main building. The team is assembled in the conference room awaiting your arrival. As they walked, Rodriguez briefed him on the project's status, but Harmon found his attention drifting. Somewhere in this facility was Samuel Thompson's son, the boy he had watched from afar for 30 years, sending anonymous checks for birthdays and graduations, monitoring his progress through school and the military. Michael had never known the source of those gifts, never known that the grizzled tank commander who had served with his father was watching over him, honoring a promise made to a dying friend. Sir? Rodriguez's voice snapped him back to the present. We've arrived. The conference room doors slid open to reveal a spacious, modern facility dominated by a large table. Around it sat a dozen men and women in various uniforms and civilian attire. At the head of the table stood a man in his mid-30s, dark hair cropped in military fashion, his bearing unmistakably that of a career officer. Harmon would have recognized Michael Thompson anywhere. He was the spitting image of his father. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez announced, Colonel Richard Harmon, retired. Michael Thompson looked up from the digital display he had been manipulating, his expression neutral as he assessed the new arrival. Colonel, he acknowledged with a nod, welcome to Project Chimera. I understand General Hayes believes your combat experience will be valuable to our development process. No recognition in those eyes. No awareness that he was addressing the man who had held his father as he died. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, Harmon replied formally, willing his voice to remain steady. I'm looking forward to learning about your vision for the next generation of American armor. Thompson gestured to an empty chair. Please join us. We were just discussing the preliminary mobility trials for the XM1A5 prototype. As Harmon settled into his seat, Thompson resumed his presentation, manipulating the holographic display to show a sleek tank design that bore only passing resemblance to the current Abrams. As you can see, the XM1A5 represents a paradigm shift in American armor philosophy, Thompson explained, his voice confident, passionate. We've reduced the base weight by 28% while increasing horsepower by 18%. The result is a power-to-weight ratio that delivers unprecedented tactical mobility. Harmon studied the specifications scrolling beside the 3D model. At the cost of significant armor reduction, he observed. A subtle tension entered Thompson's posture. Traditional passive armor, yes, but our integrated active protection system provides superior defense against modern anti-tank weapons. Until it doesn't, Harmon countered, technology fails, especially in combat conditions. Thompson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, Colonel, modern battlefield dynamics have evolved significantly since your active service. Our simulations indicate that tactical mobility will be the critical factor in survivability against peer adversaries. The challenge in his tone was clear. You're out of date, a relic from another era. Simulations, Harmon repeated, allowing a hint of skepticism to color the word. I've yet to see a simulation that accurately replicates the chaos of actual combat. Before Thompson could respond, a woman seated halfway down the table cleared her throat. Perhaps we should move past theoretical debates and show Colonel Harmon our actual progress, she suggested diplomatically. Thompson nodded. Excellent idea, Dr. Reynolds. He turned to Harmon, our chief propulsion engineer, Dr. Sarah Reynolds. She's responsible for the advanced turbine system that powers the XM-1A5. Sarah Reynolds was in her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Harmon immediately respected. Colonel Harmon, she greeted him, I'd be happy to give you a tour of our prototype development facility after the briefing. The rest of the meeting proceeded with similar introductions and brief overviews of various systems. Throughout, Harmon noted the tension radiating from Michael Thompson whenever he asked questions about protection versus mobility. Clearly, the young officer had staked his professional reputation on this high mobility concept. After the briefing concluded, Thompson approached Harmon as the others filed out. Colonel, a word in private? Harmon followed Thompson to a smaller conference room adjacent to the main facility. As soon as the door closed, Thompson's professional facade cracked slightly. Let me be direct, Colonel, he began, his tone controlled but edged with frustration. I understand General Hayes believes your combat experience is valuable to this project. I respect that, but I need to ensure we're clear about your role here. Which is, Harmon prompted. Advisory only. Thompson folded his arms. The fundamental design philosophy of the XM-1A5 has been established after years of research and simulation. We're not looking to relitigate those decisions. Harmon studied the younger man, seeing echoes of Samuel in his determined expression. Lieutenant Colonel, may I speak candidly? Please do. Your design prioritizes speed over protection to a degree that concerns me deeply, Harmon stated flatly. History is littered with failed tank designs that made similar compromises. The British cruiser tanks, the American M18 Hellcat, even the Soviet BT series, all embraced the concept that speed could substitute for armor. All proved inadequate when facing enemies with superior firepower. Thompson's expression hardened. As I said, modern battlefield dynamics have changed. Our potential adversaries have developed precision munitions that can defeat any practical thickness of conventional armor. The solution isn't more steel. It's not being where the enemy expects you to be. And when that fails, Harmon challenged, when the active protection systems are overwhelmed, when electronic countermeasures degrade your situational awareness, what protects your crew then? For a moment, raw emotion flashed in Thompson's eyes, quickly suppressed. With respect, Colonel, tank tactics have evolved since Desert Storm. We're not charging across open desert against inferior opponents anymore. The dismissal stung, but Harmon kept his expression neutral. No, today's opponents are more sophisticated, more lethal, all the more reason not to compromise on crew protection. Thompson uncrossed his arms, his posture softening slightly. Colonel, I've reviewed your service record. Your experience is impressive, but technology and doctrine have advanced significantly in the past 2 decades. What worked in '91 or even 2003 may not apply to tomorrow's battlefield. The principles of armored warfare remain constant, Harmon countered. The iron triangle of firepower, protection, and mobility must remain in balance. A flicker of recognition crossed Thompson's face. The iron triangle, he repeated. My father used that term in his notebooks. Harmon's heart skipped a beat. You have your father's notebooks? Some of them. Found them in my mother's attic years ago. Thompson's expression grew distant. He was a tank commander in Desert Storm, killed in action when I was 4. I know, Harmon said softly. Thompson's gaze sharpened. You knew my father? A moment of truth. Harmon weighed his options, the promise of honesty against the risk of disrupting the project before it had even begun. I knew of him, Harmon said finally. His reputation, he was well respected in the armor community. Not a lie, but far short of the full truth. Harmon felt the weight of Samuel's dog tags, which he still carried in his pocket after all these years. Thompson seemed to accept this. He believed in the Iron Triangle too. But times change, Colonel. Technology advances. He straightened his uniform jacket, professional demeanor returning. Dr. Reynolds should be ready for your tour now. I have another meeting to attend. As Thompson turned to leave, Harmon called after him. Your father was a good man, Lieutenant Colonel, a good soldier. He understood the cost of command decisions. Thompson paused at the door, his back to Harmon. Thank you, sir, he said quietly, then departed. Harmon released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, Thompson's dog tags heavy in his pocket. Not the confrontation he had feared, but neither the reconnection he had secretly hoped for. The door opened again, revealing Sarah Reynolds. Colonel, ready for that tour? The prototype development facility resembled an automotive manufacturing plant merged with a high-tech research laboratory. Robotic arms assembled components with millimeter precision. Engineers in clean suits worked on complex electronic systems. In the center of it all stood the partially completed hull of what would become the XM1A5 prototype. Impressive, Harmon acknowledged as Reynolds led him along the observation walkway. But I've seen impressive technology fail catastrophically under combat conditions. Reynolds smiled. You don't mince words, do you, Colonel? Not when lives are at stake. She nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I share some of your concerns about the armor reduction. The turbine system I've designed can handle additional weight. We could maintain much of the mobility advantage without compromising protection to this degree. Harmon studied her with newfound interest. Then why the current design parameters? Reynolds hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Project requirements from higher up the chain. Non-negotiable, apparently. From General Hayes. Above my pay grade, Colonel. But the parameters came through Lieutenant Colonel Thompson with unusual specificity. She shrugged. Military projects always have political dimensions, don't they? Before Harmon could pursue this line of questioning, a commotion near the main entrance caught their attention. A group of civilians in expensive suits was being escorted through the security checkpoint. Who are they? Harmon asked. Reynolds frowned. Arcturus defense representatives. They're providing some of the electronic, warfare, and active protection components for the XM1A5. Harmon recognized the Arcturus name, a major defense contractor that had emerged in the post-Iraq War military-industrial complex, known for aggressive lobbying and cutting-edge technology. Their CEO is a former general, isn't he? Harmon recalled. James Miller, 3-star, retired about 15 years ago. Reynolds' expression turned guarded. He and Thompson seemed quite friendly. Harmon watched as the Arcturus team was greeted by Thompson himself, noting the warm handshake between the lieutenant colonel and an older man who could only be Miller. The former general carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power. Something about Miller triggered a distant memory, but Harmon couldn't quite place it. They provide the active protection system? Harmon asked. And the electronic warfare suite, Reynolds confirmed. Proprietary technology. Very hush-hush. The systems that supposedly make armor thickness less relevant, Harmon mused. Reynolds glanced at him sharply. You don't sound convinced, Colonel. Let's just say I've learned to be skeptical of miracle solutions, Doctor. Harmon turned away from the Arcturus group. Show me the mobility system you've designed. Help me understand why Lieutenant Colonel Thompson believes speed is the new armor. For the next hour, Reynolds guided Harmon through the technical details of the XM1A5's propulsion system. Her enthusiasm for the engineering was genuine, her knowledge impressive. Harmon found himself respecting her expertise, even as he maintained reservations about the overall design philosophy. As they concluded the tour, Reynolds led Harmon to a small office she used when working late. One more thing you might find interesting, she said, retrieving a tablet from her desk. Early simulation results from the prototype's mobility trials. The video showed a sleek, low-profile tank executing high-speed maneuvers across various terrains. Its acceleration and agility were indeed impressive, far surpassing the capabilities of the current Abrams. 67 miles per hour on improved roads, Reynolds noted. 43 cross-country, almost twice the speed of the M1A2. At what cost? Harmon asked quietly. Reynolds hesitated. The armor package is minimal, she admitted. Sufficient against RPGs and older anti-tank weapons, but vulnerable to modern kinetic penetrators and top-attack munitions. The active protection system is supposed to counter those threats? In theory, Reynolds said, her tone suggesting skepticism. Arcturus claims a 95% interception rate in testing. And in actual combat conditions, with electronic countermeasures, multiple simultaneous threats? Reynolds closed the tablet. Those scenarios haven't been fully modeled yet. Harmon nodded, unsurprised. They never are, Doctor. Reality has a way of being more complicated than simulations predict. As Reynolds walked him back toward the main building, Harmon's thoughts returned to Michael Thompson. The young officer clearly believed in his high-mobility concept with almost religious fervor. But why? What drove his apparent dismissal of conventional armor protection? Dr. Reynolds, Harmon began carefully, what do you know about Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's father? Reynolds slowed her pace. Not much. He died in Desert Storm, I believe. Tank commander. She glanced at Harmon. Why do you ask? Just curious about what might be driving the lieutenant colonel's design philosophy, Harmon replied, keeping his tone casual. Family traditions often influence military careers. Well, he doesn't talk about his father much, Reynolds said. Though, she paused, seemingly debating whether to continue. Though, Harmon prompted, there was one incident about 6 months ago. Late night, most of the team had gone home. I came back to the lab for some data and found Thompson at his desk, pretty deep into a bottle of bourbon. Reynolds frowned at the memory. He was reviewing after-action reports from Desert Storm. Something about tank losses due to mobility limitations. Harmon felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Did he mention his father specifically? He said something about his father's tank being too slow to escape an ambush, Reynolds recalled. That if the Abrams had been faster, more men would have come home. She shrugged. I didn't press for details. He was pretty upset. The pieces clicked into place for Harmon. Michael believed his father had died because the M1A1 Abrams lacked sufficient speed to escape a threat. A belief that was fundamentally wrong, but one that would explain his almost fanatical devotion to increasing mobility at the expense of protection. Samuel Thompson hadn't died because his tank was too slow. He had died making a deliberate choice to protect his crew, his commander. He had died a hero. And his son had built his career on a misunderstanding of that sacrifice. Before Harmon could process this realization, they rounded a corner to find Michael Thompson deep in conversation with the Arcturus CEO, James Miller. The two men fell silent as Harmon and Reynolds approached. Colonel Harmon, Thompson acknowledged, I see Dr. Reynolds has given you the grand tour. She has, Harmon confirmed. Impressive operation you're running here, Lieutenant Colonel. Miller stepped forward, extending his hand. General James Miller, retired, CEO of Arcturus Defense. Colonel Harmon, your reputation precedes you. As Harmon shook the man's hand, recognition finally clicked. James Miller had been a brigade commander in the 1st Armored Division during Desert Storm. Not directly in Harmon's chain of command, but present in the theater. General, Harmon nodded, your company is providing the active protection system for the XM1A5. Among other critical components, Miller confirmed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Our Aegis system represents the cutting edge of defensive technology. It makes traditional armor thickness increasingly irrelevant. An interesting theory, Harmon replied neutrally. I look forward to seeing the test data. Miller's smile tightened fractionally. All in good time, Colonel. Security protocols, you understand. He turned to Thompson. We should continue our discussion later, Michael. The Secretary's office is expecting those projections by Friday. After Miller departed, Thompson turned to Harmon. General Miller has been instrumental in securing continued funding for this project, Colonel. His insights have been invaluable. I'm sure they have, Harmon replied, unable to keep a hint of dryness from his tone. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. Is there a problem, Colonel? Not at all, Harmon assured him. I'm just curious about the decision-making process that led to such a radical departure from established armor doctrine. As I explained earlier, modern threats require modern solutions, Thompson stated firmly. The days of relying on thick steel armor are over. Speed, electronic warfare, and active protection systems are the future. Harmon decided to test his theory. And what happens when those systems fail? When a crew finds itself without its technological advantages? A flash of emotion crossed Thompson's face. Then they'd better be fast enough to avoid being hit, he said tersely. Excuse me, I have work to attend to. As Thompson strode away, Reynolds gave Harmon a speculative look. You certainly know how to push his buttons, Colonel. Just trying to understand his perspective, Harmon replied mildly. Well, you've got 3 months to figure him out, Reynolds said. Meanwhile, I've been instructed to set you up with access to our historical tank performance database. Apparently, General Hayes wants you to provide context for how previous mobility-focused designs performed in actual combat. Harmon smiled for the first time that day. Now that's something I can help with. Later that evening, alone in the temporary quarters assigned to him on the base, Harmon reviewed the information he had gathered during his first day. The XM1A5 design troubled him deeply, not just because of its prioritization of speed over protection, but because of the apparent influence Arcturus Defense wielded over the project. Military procurement, it had always involved politics and corporate interests, but something about Miller's involvement felt wrong. The man's demeanor, his closeness with Thompson, the proprietary nature of the critical defensive systems, it all raised red flags. And then there was Michael Thompson himself, brilliant, dedicated, but apparently driven by a fundamental misunderstanding of his father's death. A misunderstanding that could potentially endanger future generations of American tank crews. Harmon removed Samuel Thompson's dog tags from his pocket, running his thumb over the stamped metal. "What would you do, Sam?" he murmured. "How do I tell your son the truth without destroying everything he's built his career on?" The dog tags offered no answer, just the cold weight of responsibility and memory. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he found Sarah Reynolds standing in the hallway, a folder tucked under her arm. "Dr. Reynolds?" he greeted her, surprised. "What can I do for you?" "May I come in, Colonel? I have something you should see." Harmon stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Once the door was closed, Reynolds handed him the folder. "What is this?" he asked. "Test data from the Arcturus Active Protection System," she replied. "The complete data set, not the sanitized version they have been providing to the project team." Harmon opened the folder, finding pages of technical specifications and test results. "Where did you get this?" "I have friends in the testing division," Reynolds said simply. "The Aegis system that Miller claims has a 95% interception rate. In actual field conditions against multiple simultaneous threats, it drops to below 60%. Worse in electronic warfare environments." Harmon flipped through the pages, his concern growing with each revelation. "Thompson has seen this data?" "Only the version Arcturus wants him to see," Reynolds confirmed. "They've been very careful about controlling information flow. But I've had my doubts about their claims for months. These numbers confirm it." "Why bring this to me?" Harmon asked, studying her face. "Why not take it directly to Thompson?" Reynolds sighed. "Lieutenant Colonel Thompson is invested in the current design philosophy, and his relationship with Millen is complicated." She met Harmon's gaze directly. "But you served in actual tank combat. You understand what's at stake, and you're not afraid to challenge the status quo." Harmon closed the folder. "This could derail the entire project, Doctor." "Better that than sending American soldiers into battle with inadequate protection," she countered. She was right, of course, but the implications extended beyond the technical specifications of a tank. This was about Michael Thompson's legacy, his understanding of his father's sacrifice, and potentially his career. "I need time to review this properly," Harmon said finally, "to understand the full implications." Reynolds nodded. "Take all the time you need, Colonel, but please be careful who you share it with. Arcturus has significant political influence." After she left, Harmon returned to his contemplation of Samuel Thompson's dog tags, the folder of damning test data on the table beside him. The iron triangle of tank design had always been about balancing firepower, protection, and mobility. But now Harmon faced a different triangle: truth, duty, and personal loyalty. The truth about Samuel Thompson's death, his duty to protect future American tank crews, and his personal loyalty to the memory of a friend who had saved his life. 3 points, impossible to perfectly balance. A choice would have to be made. As night fell over Aberdeen Proving Ground, Colonel Richard Harmon prepared for a battle unlike any he had faced before. Not with tanks and artillery, but with truth and secrets long buried in the sands of Iraq. The next morning found Harmon in the project's central archive, accessing historical tank performance data. He had spent most of the night reviewing Reynolds' leaked test results, confirming his worst fears about the Arcturus Active Protection System. Now he needed historical evidence to support his concerns about the XM1A5's design philosophy. The database contained combat performance records from World War II through recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Harmon focused on vehicles that had prioritized mobility over protection: the British Crusader and Cromwell cruiser tanks, the American M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, the early Soviet BT series. The pattern was clear and concerning. In every case, vehicles that sacrificed armor for speed showed initial tactical advantages, but ultimately suffered higher crew casualty rates when facing determined opposition with adequate anti-tank capabilities. Harmon compiled the data into a comprehensive analysis, careful to let the numbers speak for themselves rather than inserting his own opinions. As he worked, he became aware of someone watching him from the archive entrance. Michael Thompson stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Colonel," he acknowledged, "you're here early." "Old habit," Harmon replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Care to join me?" After a moment's hesitation, Thompson entered and took the offered seat. "Dr. Reynolds says you've been exploring historical data on mobility-focused armor designs." "I have," Harmon confirmed. "General Hayes asked me to provide historical context for the project." Thompson glanced at the screen, displaying Harmon's compilation. "The Crusader tank," he noted. "British cruiser design from World War II. Fast, but under-armored." "You know your history," Harmon observed. "My father's influences," Thompson admitted. "He left notebooks full of armor tactics and historical analyses. I grew up reading them." Harmon felt a pang of recognition. Samuel Thompson had been meticulous about recording his observations and research. "Those notebooks helped shape your interest in armor design?" Thompson nodded, his expression softening slightly. He was passionate about the balance between the three elements of tank design. Called it the Iron Triangle. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I still have his drawings explaining the concept. Very detailed for a field officer." Harmon sensed an opening, yet your current design philosophy seems to prioritize mobility over protection. That's a significant departure from traditional American armor doctrine. The brief moment of openness vanished from Thompson's expression. "Modern threats require modern solutions, Colonel. My father was brilliant, but he operated in a different era, with different technologies and different threats. The fundamental principles haven't changed," Harmon countered gently. "When active systems fail, when electronic countermeasures degrade your capabilities, physical armor remains the final defense between your crew and enemy fire." Thompson's jaw tightened. "You sound like my father." "I'll take that as a compliment," Harmon said quietly. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in Thompson's eyes. Then the professional mask returned. "I have a meeting with the propulsion team in 10 minutes. I just wanted to check in on your progress." He stood. "Will you have your historical analysis ready for Friday's project review?" "I will," Harmon promised. "Though I'm not sure you'll like my conclusions." Thompson paused. "Colonel, I understand you have concerns about our design philosophy. I respect your experience. But this project represents years of research and development, backed by extensive modeling and simulation. We're not going to change course based on historical examples from conflicts fought with radically different technologies." Harmon met his gaze steadily. "Lieutenant Colonel, would you humor an old soldier with a hypothetical question?" "Go ahead. If your active protection systems fail in combat, if your electronic warfare advantages are neutralized, what protects your crew?" Thompson hesitated. "Speed and maneuver would remain our primary advantages. And if you can't maneuver, if you're disabled or confined by terrain?" A flash of genuine emotion crossed Thompson's face. "Then we've failed our mission," he said quietly. "And our crews." Without waiting for Harmon's response, he turned and left the archive. Harmon watched him go, struck by the weight of unspoken history between them. Michael Thompson was brilliant, dedicated, passionate about protecting American soldiers. But his understanding of his father's legacy, of the very nature of armored warfare, was fundamentally flawed. And Harmon still had no idea how to correct that misunderstanding without betraying a friendship that had ended in sacrifice 34 years earlier. Later that day, as Harmon was completing his analysis in the small office he'd been assigned, Sarah Reynolds appeared at his door. "Colonel, do you have a moment?" she asked, her expression troubled. "Of course." Harmon gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "What's on your mind, Doctor?" Reynolds closed the door before speaking. "I've been reviewing procurement documents for the XM1A5 project," she said, her voice low. "Something doesn't add up." "Go on." "The Arcturus active protection system isn't just one component," she explained. "It's part of a comprehensive package that includes electronic warfare capabilities, targeting systems, even the main fire control computer. All proprietary, all closed source." "That's not unusual for defense contracts," Harmon noted. "No, but this is." Reynolds handed him a tablet displaying technical schematics. "These systems are designed to interface with a suite of unmanned support vehicles. Essentially, the XM1A5 is being engineered as the command node for a network of robotic weapons platforms." Harmon studied the schematics with growing concern. Autonomous combat vehicles? That's still experimental technology. And it's not part of the official XM1A5 requirements, Reynolds pointed out. Yet the integration capabilities are being built into the core systems. Why design for functionality that isn't part of the mission profile? The implication was clear. Arcturus was positioning itself for future contracts beyond the XM-1A5 itself, using the tank as a platform for a much broader autonomous warfare system. Have you discussed this with Lieutenant Colonel Thompson? Harmon asked. Reynolds hesitated. He's aware of the integration capabilities, considers them future-proofing the design. But you're not convinced. I'm an engineer, Colonel. I design systems to fulfill specific requirements. These capabilities go far beyond what's needed for the XM-1A5's stated mission profile. She leaned forward, and they add complexity that could compromise reliability in the field. Harmon nodded slowly. The picture was becoming clearer. Arcturus wasn't just providing components for the XM-1A5. They were using it as a vehicle to advance their broader autonomous warfare agenda. And Michael Thompson, whether knowingly or not, was enabling their strategy. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Doctor, Harmon said. I'll incorporate it into my analysis for Friday's review. After Reynolds departed, Harmon sat back in his chair, considering the implications. The XM-1A5 project was becoming more concerning with each revelation. Inadequate physical protection, over-reliance on unproven active defense systems, and now design elements suggesting future autonomous warfare capabilities that hadn't been properly vetted or authorized, all championed by the son of a man who had died ensuring his crew's protection. The irony was bitter. Harmon's contemplation was interrupted by a knock on his door. Opening it, he found himself face-to-face with General James Miller. Colonel Harmon, Miller greeted him with the practiced smile of a corporate executive. Do you have a few minutes to chat? Harmon concealed his surprise. Of course, General. Please, come in. Miller entered, his gaze sweeping the small office, taking in the historical tank performance data displayed on Harmon's screens. Quite the deep dive you're conducting, he observed. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson mentioned you've been reviewing historical combat data. General Hayes asked me to provide historical context for the project, Harmon explained, watching Miller carefully. Specifically regarding the balance between mobility and protection. Miller nodded, settling into the chair Reynolds had vacated minutes earlier. Important context, certainly, though I wonder how relevant World War II and Cold War data is to modern combat environments. The fundamentals of armored warfare haven't changed, Harmon replied. Technology evolves, but physics remains constant. Kinetic energy, explosive force. The human bodies were tasked with protecting. Miller's smile tightened slightly. Direct as always, Dick. May I call you Dick? Colonel will do fine, Harmon said mildly. If Miller was offended by the correction, he didn't show it. Colonel, then, I understand you have reservations about the XM-1A5's protection systems. I have questions, Harmon clarified, about the balance between physical armor and active defense systems, about system redundancy and failure modes. All legitimate concerns, Miller acknowledged smoothly, which is why Arcturus has invested billions in developing the most advanced active protection system ever fielded. Our Aegis platform has demonstrated unprecedented interception rates in testing. Under ideal conditions, Harmon noted. What about degraded environments? Electronic countermeasures? Multiple simultaneous threats? Miller's eyes narrowed fractionally. You seem remarkably well informed about our test protocols, Colonel. I'm familiar with standard evaluation parameters for combat systems, Harmon replied, giving nothing away. Any responsible assessment would include degraded environment testing. Of course, Miller agreed. And I can assure you our systems exceed all required performance metrics under all tested conditions. The careful phrasing wasn't lost on Harmon. All tested conditions, he repeated, which may not include all potential combat conditions. Miller's practiced smile never wavered. No test regime can account for every possible scenario, Colonel. You know that as well as anyone. Which is why traditional armor remains essential, Harmon concluded, as the final line of defense when active systems fail or are overwhelmed. For a moment, the corporate mask slipped, revealing something harder in Miller's expression. The future of warfare isn't lumbering behemoths with thick steel plates, Colonel. It's rapid deployment, precision engagement in networked combat systems. Perhaps, Harmon allowed, but the soldiers inside those systems deserve every protection we can provide them. Miller stood, straightening his expensive suit jacket. You know, Colonel, your reputation precedes you. Distinguished service record. Multiple decorations for valor, the respect of your peers. He paused. But one might question whether your combat experiences from decades ago remain relevant to modern warfare doctrine. The threat was subtle but clear. Miller was prepared to challenge Harmon's credibility if necessary. Experience may age, General, but principles endure, Harmon replied calmly. The protection of American soldiers isn't a doctrine that changes with technology. Miller's smile returned, colder than before. Noble sentiment, but sentiment doesn't win wars, Colonel. He moved toward the door. I look forward to your presentation on Friday. I'm sure it will be educational. After Miller departed, Harmon released a long breath. The former general turned defense contractor clearly saw him as a threat to Arcturus's agenda, and he was prepared to neutralize that threat by any means necessary. But Miller's visit had confirmed what Harmon already suspected. The XM-1A5 project had been compromised by corporate interests that prioritized technological innovation and future contracts over crew protection and combat effectiveness. The question now was how to address these concerns without destroying Michael Thompson's career. The young officer might be misguided in his approach, might be unwittingly serving Arcturus's agenda, but his fundamental motivation was honorable: to protect American soldiers through advanced technology, just as his father had protected his crew through sacrifice. As evening settled over Aberdeen Proving Ground, Harmon made his decision. He would complete his historical analysis, documenting the performance of mobility-focused armor designs in actual combat. He would incorporate Reynolds's findings about the Arcturus systems, highlighting the risks of over-reliance on unproven technologies. And he would present these findings at Friday's project review. Consequences be damned. He owed it to Samuel Thompson, to Michael, to every future American tank crew who would trust their lives to the XM-1A5. As he worked late into the night compiling data and refining his presentation, Harmon was unaware of the storm gathering around him. Unaware that his quiet investigation had triggered alarms within Arcturus Defense. Unaware that James Miller was already taking steps to neutralize the threat he posed to the company's ambitions. Unaware that the battle for the soul of American armored warfare was about to become intensely personal. The next morning, Harmon arrived at the development facility earlier than usual, intending to examine the prototype XM-1A5 hull while the facility was relatively empty. The physical structure would tell him more than any digital model or simulation. As he approached the security checkpoint, the guard's expression changed from bored to uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Colonel," the young sergeant said. "I have orders to restrict your access to the prototype development area." Harmon frowned. "On whose authority?" "Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, sir. As of 2200 hours last night," the guard shifted awkwardly. "You're limited to the administrative areas and archives until further notice." Interesting timing, Harmon thought, immediately after Miller's visit to his office. "I see, thank you, Sergeant." Changing course, Harmon headed for Thompson's office instead. He found the young officer already at his desk, reviewing technical specifications on multiple screens. "Lieutenant Colonel," Harmon said from the doorway, "I believe we need to talk." Thompson looked up, his expression guarded. "Colonel Harmon, I expected you'd be here. Care to explain why my access to the prototype has been restricted?" Thompson gestured for Harmon to enter and closed the door behind him. "Security concerns, Colonel. Information about the project has been leaked. Until we identify the source, we're limiting access to essential personnel only." "And I'm not considered essential personnel," Harmon observed, "despite being specifically requested by General Hayes." "Your role is advisory, focused on historical context," Thompson replied, his tone professionally neutral. "You don't require direct access to the prototype to fulfill that function." Harmon studied the younger man's face, noting the tension around his eyes. "This decision wouldn't have anything to do with General Miller's visit to my office yesterday, would it?" A flicker of surprise crossed Thompson's features. "General Miller mentioned your meeting. He expressed concerns about your approach to the historical analysis." "I bet he did," Harmon said dryly. "Did he happen to mention what specific concerns he had?" Thompson hesitated. "He suggested you might be bringing outdated perspectives to a next-generation project." The words sounded rehearsed, as if Thompson was repeating Miller's phrasing. "And you agreed with his assessment?" "I respect your experience, Colonel," Thompson said carefully. "But this project represents a paradigm shift in armored warfare. We're moving beyond traditional concepts of protection through armor thickness to protection through speed and active systems," Harmon finished. "Systems provided exclusively by Arcturus Defense." Thompson's expression hardened. "Arcturus is a valued partner with unparalleled expertise in active defense technologies. Their contributions to this project have been invaluable." "And their test data? Has that been invaluable too?" Harmon challenged. "Or have you only seen what they want you to see?" The question struck home. Thompson's composure slipped momentarily. What are you implying, Colonel? I'm implying that Arcturus has a vested interest in pushing their active protection systems, even if that means compromising on traditional armor, Harmon stated bluntly. And I'm concerned that their influence on this project may be prioritizing corporate interests over soldier safety. Thompson stood, anger flashing in his eyes. That's a serious accusation, Colonel. One I would advise you not to make without substantial evidence. Would performance data from actual field tests constitute evidence? Harmon asked quietly. Data showing interception rates far below what Arcturus has claimed in their official reports. The color drained from Thompson's face. You have such data? I have access to information suggesting the Aegis system may not perform as advertised under realistic combat conditions, Harmon confirmed. Information that raises serious questions about the XM-1A5's protection strategy. Thompson sank back into his chair. If what you're saying is true, it changes everything. It doesn't have to, Harmon said, softening his approach. The XM-1A5 could be redesigned with balanced protection, combining the best active systems with adequate physical armor. That would mean significant weight increases, Thompson objected, reduced mobility, extended development time. The entire project could be at risk. Better to address these issues now than after American soldiers pay the price in combat, Harmon said grimly. Thompson was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he looked up at Harmon. You remind me of my father, he said quietly. He was always concerned with protection above all else, always talking about the responsibility commanders have for their crews. The opening Harmon had been waiting for. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Thompson agreed, though I only know him through his notebooks and my mother's memories. He died in Desert Storm when I was 4. His expression darkened. His tank was too slow to escape an Iraqi ambush. That's why I've dedicated my career to developing faster, more agile combat vehicles. So what happened to him never happens again. The misconception that had driven Thompson's entire career lay exposed. Harmon chose his next words carefully. Lieutenant Colonel, what exactly do you know about your father's death? Thompson frowned. He was commanding an M1A1 Abrams during the ground offensive. His unit was ambushed by Iraqi forces with anti-tank weapons. The Abrams was too slow to maneuver out of the kill zone. His voice hardened. If he'd had a faster vehicle, he might have survived. Harmon took a deep breath. What if I told you that version of events might not be accurate? Thompson's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Combat reports can be misinterpreted, Harmon said carefully. Details lost or changed in official accounts. And how would you know what actually happened to my father? Thompson demanded, suspicion growing in his expression. The moment of truth had arrived. Harmon reached into his pocket and removed Samuel Thompson's dog tags, placing them gently on the desk between them. Because I was there, he said softly. Captain Samuel Thompson was my driver in Desert Storm. He died saving my life and the lives of our entire crew. Thompson stared at the dog tags, his hand reaching for them tentatively, as if they might dissolve at his touch. You served with my father? Harmon nodded. Eagle Troop, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, the Battle of 73 Easting, February 26, 1991. Why didn't you tell me? Thompson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because the truth about your father's death is complicated, Harmon replied. And I wasn't sure how to tell you without undermining everything you've built your career on. Thompson's fingers closed around his father's dog tags. Tell me what really happened, he demanded. I need to know the truth. Harmon took a deep breath and began the story he had carried for 34 years. The story of Samuel Thompson's final act of heroism. Not a victim of inadequate mobility, but a hero who had chosen to sacrifice himself to protect his crew. As the truth unfolded, Michael Thompson's world began to unravel, along with the foundational beliefs that had shaped his approach to tank design. And somewhere in the Arcturus Defense Headquarters, General James Miller was setting in motion plans that would threaten not just the XM-1A5 project, but the lives of everyone involved in uncovering the truth about his company's technologies. The iron triangle of tank design, firepower, protection, and mobility had never been more precariously balanced. The desert sun blazed overhead, scorching the Iraqi landscape beneath it. The radio crackled with urgent transmissions as American armor pushed forward through enemy territory. Inside the M1A1 Abrams, Captain Richard Harmon scanned the horizon through his commander's viewport. Multiple contacts ahead, his gunner reported. T-72s dug in at the ridge line. Confirmed, Harmon replied, keying his radio. Eagle 6, Eagle 2-6. We have enemy armor at grid Romeo Foxtrot 3905. Request permission to engage. Eagle 2-6, this is 6. You are cleared hot. Take them out. Harmon turned to his gunner. Target the lead vehicle. Sabot round. Target acquired, the gunner confirmed. Firing now. The Abrams shuddered as its 120mm main gun thundered. Through his sight, Harmon watched the depleted uranium round streak across the desert and strike the enemy tank with devastating precision. The T-72's turret separated from its hull in a catastrophic detonation. Target destroyed, the gunner reported, already acquiring the next threat. Driver, advance to that defilade position, Harmon ordered. We'll engage from cover. Moving now, Samuel Thompson acknowledged from the driver's compartment, guiding the massive tank forward with practiced skill. The Abrams had barely reached its new position when the first RPG streaked toward them. Thompson saw it through his viewport. RPG, 3 o'clock! Harmon swung his sight, but too late. The rocket-propelled grenade was already arcing toward their right flank. In that split second, Thompson made his decision. He turned the tank, presenting its strongest frontal armor to the incoming threat, directly exposing his own driver's compartment in the process. The explosion rocked the massive vehicle. When the smoke cleared, Harmon looked down to see Thompson slumped in his seat, blood pooling beneath him. Sam! Sam! Thompson looked up, pain etched across his features. His lips moved, forming words Harmon strained to hear over the chaos of battle. Tell Michael, tell him. Richard Harmon awoke with a start, his heart pounding against his ribs. For a moment, he was disoriented, expecting to find himself inside the confined space of an Abrams turret. Instead, he was in his temporary quarters at Aberdeen Proving Ground, the sheets twisted around him, damp with sweat. The same dream. 34 years later, and still the same dream. Harmon checked his watch, 4:17 a.m. Sleep wouldn't return now. It never did after these dreams. He rose, his old leg wound protesting as he made his way to the small desk by the window. Samuel Thompson's dog tags were gone, now in the possession of his son. In their place lay the folder containing the Arcturus Defense System test data that Sarah Reynolds had provided. The data that proved what Harmon had suspected all along, the active protection system being integrated into the XM1A5 was fundamentally flawed, nowhere near as effective as its manufacturers claimed. Yesterday's revelation to Michael Thompson had gone about as well as could be expected. The shock of learning that his father's tank commander was now his consultant. The greater shock of learning that his father hadn't died because of inadequate tank mobility, but had deliberately sacrificed himself to protect his crew. Michael had listened in stunned silence as Harmon recounted the events of that February day in 1991. When the story concluded, he had simply taken his father's dog tags and left without a word, canceling the rest of the day's meetings. Harmon couldn't blame him. The young man's entire worldview had been upended in a single conversation. The driving force behind his career, his design philosophy, his vision for the future of American armor, had been built on a misunderstanding of his father's death. A soft knock on his door pulled Harmon from his thoughts. At this hour, he moved cautiously to the door, instincts honed by decades of service putting him on alert. Who is it? It's Michael. Thompson's voice was ragged, exhausted. May I come in? Harmon opened the door to find Lieutenant Colonel Thompson standing in the hallway, still wearing the same uniform from yesterday. His eyes were bloodshot, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. You haven't slept, Harmon observed, stepping aside to let him enter. How could I? Thompson moved into the room, Samuel's dog tags clutched in his hand. Everything I thought I knew about my father, about why I became an armor officer, it was built on a lie. Not a lie, Harmon corrected gently. A misunderstanding. Your mother probably never knew the full story. Combat reports can be vague, details lost in the chaos. Thompson sank into a chair, staring at the dog tags. I've based my entire career on making tanks faster, more agile, sacrificing protection for mobility. He looked up at Harmon, eyes haunted. I've been betraying his legacy, not honoring it. Harmon poured 2 cups of coffee from the small machine in his quarters, handing one to Thompson. Your father believed in balance, and he said, the iron triangle of firepower, mobility, and protection. But when forced to choose, he prioritized the safety of his crew over everything else. And I've been designing a tank that would have gotten him killed even faster, Thompson said bitterly. You were working with the information you had, Harmon replied, and your intentions were honorable. You wanted to protect American soldiers, just as your father did. Thompson took a sip of coffee, gathering himself. Tell me about him, he said quietly. Not the official record. Tell me what he was really like. For the next hour, as dawn broke over Aberdeen Proving Ground, Richard Harmon shared stories of Samuel Thompson, his professionalism and skill, his dry humor in the face of danger, his passionate debates about tank tactics over mess hall coffee. He kept this notebook, Harmon explained, filled it with observations, tactical analyses, ideas for improving the Abrams. The man thought like an engineer as much as a soldier. I found some of his notebooks in my mother's attic years ago, Thompson said. Reading them was like hearing his voice for the first time. He paused, turning the dog tags over in his palm. Did he talk about me? All the time, Harmon assured him. Carried your picture in his helmet, showed it to anyone who'd look. Proudest father I ever met. Thompson absorbed this, emotions playing across his face. Finally, he straightened, military discipline reasserting itself. The Arcturus Active Protection System, he said. You mentioned yesterday you had data showing it doesn't perform as advertised. I do, Harmon confirmed, indicating the folder on his desk. Under ideal conditions in controlled tests, it achieves the 95% interception rate they claim. But in realistic combat scenarios, with multiple threats, electronic countermeasures, adverse environmental conditions, the effectiveness drops below 60%, sometimes as low as 40%. Thompson's expression darkened. That's completely unacceptable for a system meant to replace conventional armor protection. Exactly my concern, Harmon agreed. Yet the XM1A5 design reduces armor thickness by 30% in reliance on this system. Where did you get this data? Thompson asked. Better you don't know, Harmon replied, but I can verify its authenticity. Thompson considered this, his engineer's mind clearly processing the implications. If this is accurate, we need to completely redesign the XM1A5 protection package. Restore conventional armor thickness while maintaining the active system as a supplement, not a replacement. That would mean significant weight increases, Harmon pointed out, which impacts your mobility goals. Then we adjust the mobility goals, Thompson said firmly. My father understood that protection takes precedence when lives are at stake. I see that now. Harmon felt a surge of pride for the young officer. Samuel would have approved of his son's willingness to reassess his position in light of new evidence. There's one more thing you should know, Harmon said. Dr. Reynolds discovered that the Arcturus systems are designed with integration capabilities for autonomous combat vehicles. Capabilities not part of the official XM1A5 requirements. Thompson frowned. What are you suggesting? That Arcturus may be using the XM1A5 project to advance their own agenda, Harmon explained, positioning themselves for future contracts on autonomous warfare systems by embedding the necessary infrastructure now. General Miller never mentioned this, Thompson said slowly. I suspect there's a lot General Miller hasn't mentioned, Harmon replied, including his connection to your father. Thompson's head snapped up. What connection? Harmon hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. I've been trying to remember where I knew Miller from during Desert Storm. Yesterday it finally clicked. He was a brigade commander in the 1st Armored Division, not directly in our chain of command, but operating in the same sector during the 73 Easting engagement. You think he knew my father? It's possible, Harmon acknowledged. The armor community was small even then. But something about his involvement in this project, his relationship with you, it doesn't feel right. Thompson stood abruptly. We need to re-examine everything. The design parameters, the Arcturus components, the protection standards. His eyes were clear now, determination replacing the earlier confusion. The project review is tomorrow morning. We need to be prepared to present our concerns formally. That could be politically risky, Harmon warned. Arcturus has powerful connections in the Pentagon. Miller won't take this challenge lightly. I don't care, Thompson declared. This is about protecting American soldiers. My father gave his life for that principle. I won't dishonor his sacrifice by compromising on crew protection. As Thompson departed to begin preparations for the review, Harmon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The truth, long buried in the Iraqi desert, had finally emerged. And with it, Samuel Thompson's legacy had found new life in his son. But Harmon's relief was tempered by caution. James Miller and Arcturus Defense had billions of dollars invested in the XM1A5 project. They wouldn't abandon their agenda without a fight, and men like Miller, who balanced military prestige with corporate power, could be dangerous enemies. The coming confrontation would require all the tactical skill Harmon had developed over his long career. Not on a battlefield of sand and steel, but in the equally treacherous terrain of military procurement and corporate influence. Sarah Reynolds was already at work when Harmon arrived at the main development facility later that morning. Her expression brightened when she saw him. "Colonel," she greeted him, "I wasn't sure you'd still have access after yesterday's restrictions." "Lieutenant Colonel Thompson rescinded those orders this morning," Harmon explained. "We've had a clarifying conversation." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "About the Arcturus data?" "About many things," Harmon replied. "But yes, the test results you provided have been very illuminating. Thompson agrees we need to reassess the entire protection philosophy for the XM1A5. "That's unexpected," Reynolds admitted. "He's been committed to the high mobility, reduced armor concept since the project began." "New information has given him reason to reconsider," Harmon said simply. "We're preparing a comprehensive analysis for tomorrow's project review. I could use your expertise on the technical details." Reynolds glanced around, lowering her voice. "You should know that General Miller was here early this morning. He and his Arcturus team spent over an hour in Thompson's office. They left looking displeased." Harmon frowned. "Thompson didn't mention meeting with Miller." "That's because he didn't," Reynolds clarified. "Thompson wasn't here. Miller used his executive access to enter the office unaccompanied. Security protocol violations, but no one challenges a former three-star general with Pentagon connections." The implications were troubling. Miller had clearly been searching for something. Information, evidence. Whatever his purpose, it suggested he suspected the threat to his company's interests. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Harmon decided. "Miller knows something's happening. The sooner we present our findings officially, the better." "There's more," Reynolds said, leading Harmon to a secluded corner of the development floor. "I've been analyzing the integration capabilities I mentioned yesterday, the ones designed for autonomous combat vehicles. And it's worse than I thought." Reynolds pulled up technical specifications on her tablet. "These aren't just passive interfaces for future expansion. There's active command and control architecture embedded in the core systems. Architecture that could theoretically assume control of the XM1A5 itself under certain conditions." Harmon's blood ran cold. "You're saying Arcturus has built a backdoor into the tank's control systems?" "Not a backdoor exactly," Reynolds clarified. "More like conditional autonomous operation protocols. The documentation frames it as a safety feature. If the crew is incapacitated, the system could theoretically navigate the tank to safety, or navigate it according to priorities other than the crew's intentions," Harmon observed grimly. "Exactly my concern," Reynolds agreed. "There's no justification for this level of autonomous capability in the official requirements. It represents a fundamental shift in control philosophy that hasn't been properly vetted or authorized." Harmon considered the implications. The Abrams had always been designed with the crew as the ultimate authority. The idea of embedded systems that could potentially override crew decisions, however conditionally, represented a dangerous precedent. "We need to include this in our presentation," he decided. "The Project Review Committee needs to understand the full scope of what Arcturus is attempting here." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Thompson. The young officer looked transformed from the shattered man of earlier that morning. He was once again the confident project director, though his eyes carried a new determination. "Colonel Dr. Reynolds," he greeted them, "we need to talk privately. My office now." Once they were secured in Thompson's office, he activated a signal jammer designed to prevent electronic eavesdropping. "I've spent the morning reviewing the Arcturus test data and the system architecture Dr. Reynolds identified," he began without preamble. "The situation is worse than we thought." "How so?" Harmon asked. "I've been comparing the official requirements document with the actual implemented systems," Thompson explained. "There are significant discrepancies, capabilities that were never requested or approved, decision-making algorithms that weren't disclosed to the project team. Similar to what I found in the integration architecture," Reynolds noted. "But more extensive," Thompson confirmed. "This isn't just future-proofing or safety redundancy. This is a fundamental alteration of the XM1A5's operational paradigm." He fixed Harmon with a determined gaze. "We need to halt the project immediately pending a full technical and ethical review." "Miller won't allow that without a fight," Harmon warned. "I'm counting on it," Thompson replied, "because when he fights, he'll have to defend these unauthorized modifications. Modifications that compromise crew authority and potentially endanger soldiers." "You're setting up a confrontation," Harmon observed. "I'm forcing transparency," Thompson corrected. If the Arcturus systems are as reliable and benign as Miller claims, he should welcome the review. Harmon nodded, impressed by the young officer's strategy. And if he resists, then his objections become evidence in themselves, Thompson said. No legitimate defense contractor would oppose a safety review unless they had something to hide. It was a bold approach, worthy of Samuel Thompson's son. Harmon felt a surge of pride, tempered by concern for the risks involved. Miller has powerful allies in the Pentagon and Congress, and he cautioned. This could become politically complicated very quickly. I'm prepared for that, Thompson assured him. But I'll need both of you to present your findings at tomorrow's review. Dodrick Reynolds, your technical analysis of the autonomous capabilities. Colonel, your assessment of the protection systems and historical context. You can count on us, Reynolds promised. There's one more thing, Thompson added. General Hayes is flying in for the review. He needs to understand the full scope of our concerns before Miller can frame the narrative. Hayes is a straight-edged shooter, Harmon noted. If we present solid evidence, he'll support a proper investigation. Let's hope so, Thompson replied, because we're potentially disrupting a multi-billion-dollar defense contract with significant political backing. As they outlined their strategy for the project review, Harmon couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Miller's early morning visit to Thompson's office, the embedded autonomous capabilities, the connection to Desert Storm, pieces of a puzzle that hadn't yet formed a complete picture. But one thing was becoming clear. The XM-1A5 project had become the battlefield for a larger conflict between traditional military values and a new corporate-driven vision of warfare. A conflict with Samuel Thompson's legacy at its heart. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Harmon refined his historical analysis, documenting how previous attempts to substitute speed for protection had failed in actual combat conditions. Reynolds compiled technical evidence of the unauthorized autonomous capabilities embedded in the Arcturus systems. Thompson coordinated their efforts while maintaining his normal project director duties to avoid alerting Miller to their plans. By evening, they had assembled a comprehensive case for halting the XM-1A5 project, pending a full review of its protection philosophy and control architecture. Harmon felt confident in their evidence, but remained concerned about the political dynamics at play. Defense contracts of this magnitude were never purely about technical merit. As the facility emptied for the night, Harmon found himself alone in the project archives, reviewing one final set of documents. The original combat reports from the 73 Easting engagement. Something about Miller's connection to that battle continued to nag at him, a missing piece of the puzzle he couldn't quite identify. The sound of footsteps interrupted his concentration. He looked up to see Michael Thompson approaching, a file folder in his hand. "Still at it, Colonel?" Thompson observed, taking a seat opposite Harmon. "Just trying to fill in some historical gaps," Harmon explained. "The more complete our context, the stronger our case." Thompson nodded, placing his folder on the table. "I found something you should see. Personnel records from Desert Storm, specifically the 1st Armored Division Command Structure during February 1991. Harmon opened the folder to find organizational charts and deployment orders. "Where did you get these?" "I still have friends at the Pentagon," Thompson replied. "Called in a favor. I wanted to understand exactly what General Miller's role was during the 73 Easting engagement." Harmon examined the documents, quickly locating Miller's position in the command structure. "Brigade commander, as I remembered. But his unit was operating north of our position during the main engagement." "Keep reading," Thompson urged. Harmon turned to the next page, finding after-action reports and communication logs. As he read, a cold understanding began to form. "Miller's brigade was supposed to support your father's unit," he said slowly. "They were tasked with providing flanking security against Iraqi counterattacks. But they never arrived," Thompson finished. "According to these reports, Miller redirected his forces to exploit a breakthrough opportunity without notifying adjacent units. Leaving our right flank exposed," Harmon continued, memory flooding back. "That's where the RPG team that hit your father's tank came from, the sector that should have been secured by Miller's brigade." The implications were staggering. James Miller's tactical decision had directly contributed to the circumstances that led to Samuel Thompson's death, a fact that would have been documented in the after-action reviews and command debriefings. "He knew," Thompson said quietly. "All these years, Miller knew his decision played a role in my father's death. And yet he cultivated a relationship with you," Harmon observed. "Became your mentor on the XM-1A5 project." "Guilt?" Thompson wondered. "Or something else?" Harmon considered the question. If it were just guilt, he could have helped your career from a distance. The fact that he personally involved himself in the XM1A5 project, specifically your high mobility concept, he was using me, Thompson realized, anger flashing in his eyes. Using my misunderstanding of my father's death to advance his company's agenda, knowing all along that his own actions contributed to that death. It's a theory, Harmon cautioned, but one that fits the facts. Thompson's hands clenched into fists. We need to add this to our presentation. Carefully, Harmon advised. The historical command decisions are relevant to establishing Miller's potential conflict of interest. But we need to keep the focus on the technical and ethical concerns about the XM1A5 design. Agreed, Thompson nodded, though I'm finding it difficult to maintain professional detachment under the circumstances. Your father would understand that feeling, Harmon said gently, but he'd also remind you to focus on the mission, not personal grievances. Thompson smiled faintly. You really did know him well. Well enough to recognize him in you, Harmon replied, especially now that you've found your balance. As they continued refining their strategy for the morning's review, Harmon felt increasingly confident in their position. The evidence was compelling. Hayes was a principled leader who would recognize the legitimate concerns they were raising, and Thompson had embraced his father's true legacy, prioritizing soldier protection over technological novelty or career advancement. Yet beneath that confidence lurked a persistent unease. Miller had too much at stake to surrender without a fight, and men who rose to general's rank before transitioning to corporate power were rarely unprepared for challenges to their authority. The confrontation that loomed would test not just their evidence and arguments, but their courage and integrity as well. The true price of balance in the iron triangle of power, truth, and responsibility. The project review facility was designed for high-level briefings, with advanced presentation technology and secure communications. By 0730, it was filled with senior officers, civilian officials, and technical experts, all gathered for what they expected to be a routine progress update on the XM1A5 project. What they would receive instead was anything but routine. Harmon stood with Reynolds near the back of the room, watching the participants arrive. General Hayes entered in conversation with two civilian officials from the Pentagon's acquisition office. James Miller followed shortly after, accompanied by several Arcturus executives in expensive suits. The tension between the two groups was subtle but unmistakable. Michael Thompson approached Harmon and Reynolds, his expression professionally neutral despite the stakes. General Hayes has granted us 30 minutes for our presentation, he informed them quietly. Miller objected, but Hayes overruled him. We present immediately after the opening remarks. Miller suspects something's coming, Harmon observed, noting the former general's careful surveillance of the room. Let him suspect, Thompson replied. The evidence speaks for itself. At precisely 0800, the review began with procedural introductions and a brief overview of the XM1A5 project status. Miller appeared relaxed, confident, clearly expecting the standard technical update that characterized most project reviews. That confidence visibly faltered when General Hayes announced, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson has requested time to present some concerns regarding the current design philosophy and protection systems. Given the critical importance of crew safety, I've approved this addition to our agenda. Miller straightened in his seat, eyes narrowing as Thompson took the podium. The trap was sprung, and Miller knew it. Thank you, General Hayes, Thompson began, his voice steady and authoritative. Over the past week, significant issues have emerged regarding the XM1A5 protection philosophy and control architecture. Issues that warrant immediate attention and potentially a fundamental reassessment of the project's direction. He launched into a methodical presentation of their findings, beginning with the historical analysis Harmon had prepared. Charts and combat data demonstrated how previous attempts to substitute speed for armor protection had failed in actual combat conditions. The historical pattern is clear, Thompson concluded this section. While mobility remains a critical factor in tank design, it cannot adequately compensate for insufficient armor protection when facing determined opposition with modern anti-tank capabilities. Miller leaned forward to interject, but Hayes raised a hand, silencing him. Let's hear the complete presentation before discussion, General Miller. Thompson continued, shifting to the Arcturus Active Protection System. The official test data provided by Arcturus Defense indicates an interception rate of 95% against incoming projectiles under ideal conditions. However, independent analysis of complete test results reveals significantly lower effectiveness in realistic combat scenarios. The screen displayed the unredacted test data Reynolds had obtained, clearly showing the performance degradation under adverse conditions. In electronic warfare environments, with multiple simultaneous threats, the interception rate falls to between 40% and 60%, Thompson explained. Yet the current XM1A5 design reduces conventional armor thickness by 30% in reliance on this system, creating an unacceptable vulnerability if the active protection fails or is degraded. The room had grown completely silent, all eyes fixed on the damning data displayed on the screen. Miller's expression had hardened to granite, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the conference table. Sarah Reynolds, our chief propulsion engineer, will now present her findings regarding the Arcturus control architecture, Thompson announced, yielding the podium. Reynolds stepped forward, her professional demeanor masking the nervousness Harmon knew she must be feeling. My analysis of the Arcturus electronic warfare and fire control systems has identified significant unauthorized capabilities embedded within the core architecture, she began. With clinical precision, she outlined the autonomous operation protocols buried within the Arcturus systems, protocols that could potentially override crew decisions under certain conditions, protocols that had never been requested or approved in the official XM1A5 requirements. These capabilities represent a fundamental shift in control philosophy, Reynolds concluded, from crew-centered operation to partial autonomy under conditions defined by proprietary Arcturus algorithms. This shift has never been properly vetted or authorized by the Project Oversight Committee. As Reynolds stepped back, Thompson returned to the podium for their concluding arguments. In light of these findings, we are recommending an immediate suspension of the XM1A5 project, pending a complete technical and ethical review of its protection philosophy and control architecture. American soldiers deserve nothing less than the most balanced, effective, and crew-centered combat vehicle we can provide them. The silence that followed was deafening. General Hayes studied the presented data with a furrowed brow. The Pentagon civilians whispered urgently to each other. The Arcturus executives looked to Miller for guidance. Finally, Hayes spoke. These are serious concerns, Lieutenant Colonel. Why are they only being raised now after years of development? The issues with the active protection system only became apparent when complete test data was analyzed, Sir, Thompson explained. Data that was not previously made available to the project team, and the autonomous capabilities were only discovered through Dr. Reynolds' recent in-depth analysis of the control architecture. Hayes turned to Miller. General, would you care to respond to these allegations? Miller rose slowly, his face a careful mask of professional concern. Thank you, General Hayes. I'm disappointed that Lieutenant Colonel Thompson has chosen to present these concerns in such a public forum rather than addressing them through proper channels first. He moved to the podium with practiced confidence. The active protection system data presented is selective and lacks proper context. All defense systems show performance degradation under adverse conditions. The question is whether the overall design philosophy provides the optimal balance of capabilities for modern warfare. Miller gestured dismissively at Harmon's historical analysis. Colonel Harmon's historical examples, while interesting, have limited relevance to contemporary combat environments. Today's battlefield is dominated by precision munitions, network systems, and rapid maneuver. The XM1A5 is designed for this reality, not refighting the Gulf War or World War II. Addressing Reynolds' findings, Miller's tone became almost condescending. As for the supposed unauthorized capabilities, Dr. Reynolds has misinterpreted standard safety protocols as something more sinister. The autonomous features are emergency backups designed to protect the crew and equipment if primary systems are compromised. They represent prudent redundancy, not some nefarious attempt to override crew authority. Miller concluded with a direct appeal to Hayes. General, these concerns reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of modern combat requirements in advanced protection systems. I recommend we note them for further study, but continue the XM1A5 development as planned. Any delay would compromise America's armored warfare capabilities in an increasingly dangerous world. It was a masterful performance, dismissive without being disrespectful, technical without being impenetrable, patriotic without being jingoistic. Miller had not survived decades in the military-industrial complex without learning how to deflect criticism. Hayes considered Miller's response, then turned back to Thompson. Lieutenant Colonel, do you have any evidence that directly contradicts General Miller's explanations? This was the moment Thompson, Reynolds, and Harmon had prepared for. The moment when allegations became evidence. Yes, sir, Thompson replied. With your permission, I'd like Colonel Harmon to address the historical context that General Miller dismisses as irrelevant. Hayes nodded and Harmon stepped to the podium. He had faced enemy fire without flinching. He could face this room of generals and executives with the same steady nerve. General Hayes, I've spent my career studying the evolution of armored warfare. From its origins in World War I to modern conflicts, Harmon began. One principle has remained constant throughout that evolution. The iron triangle of firepower, mobility, and protection must remain in balance. He displayed a chart showing casualty rates in tanks with different protection philosophies. These aren't abstract historical curiosities. They represent American lives lost when we got the balance wrong, when we sacrificed protection for other priorities. Harmon's voice hardened. The current XM1A5 design compromises crew protection based on the promise of active systems that, by Arcturus's own complete test data, cannot provide the protection claimed under realistic combat conditions. He turned to address Miller directly. General Miller suggests these concerns reflect a misunderstanding of modern combat requirements. But some requirements transcend technological evolution. The requirement to bring our soldiers home alive. The requirement to provide them every possible protection when technology inevitably fails. Harmon paused, then delivered the thrust they had prepared. And perhaps most importantly, the requirement for complete transparency about systems that might override crew decisions in combat. The room tensed at the implication. Hayes leaned forward. Colonel, are you suggesting deliberate deception regarding these capabilities? I am suggesting, sir, that there are significant discrepancies between the official requirements document and the actual implemented systems, Harmon replied carefully. Discrepancies that were never disclosed to the Project Oversight Committee. Discrepancies that fundamentally alter the operational paradigm of American armor doctrine. Thompson stepped forward to support Harmon's point. General Hayes, we have documented over 30 instances where Arcturus systems include capabilities not requested or approved in the official requirements. Capabilities that could potentially compromise crew authority in combat situations. Miller's facade of calm professionalism was beginning to crack. This is absurd, he snapped. These capabilities were fully documented in the technical submissions. In appendices and supplementary materials that weren't part of the formal review process, Reynolds interjected, displaying the relevant documentation. Buried in thousands of pages of technical specifications, never highlighted for committee review. Hayes studied the evidence with growing concern. These allegations warrant further investigation, he decided. I am ordering a complete technical review of all Arcturus systems incorporated in the XM1A5 design. Miller recognized the threat to his company's position and shifted tactics. General Hayes, with all due respect, this appears to be a coordinated attempt to undermine Arcturus's position as primary contractor for the XM1A5 project, an attempt potentially motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate technical concerns. What are you implying, General Miller? Hayes asked. Miller turned to face Thompson. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's recent reassessment of the XM1A5 protection philosophy coincides suspiciously with Colonel Harmon's arrival as a consultant. A consultant who, I have recently discovered, served with Thompson's father in Desert Storm. The revelation caused a stir in the room. Hayes looked to Thompson for confirmation. That's correct, sir, Thompson acknowledged. Colonel Harmon was my father's tank commander during the 73 Easting engagement in 1991, a fact I only learned recently. And you don't see this as a conflict of interest? Miller pressed. A personal connection potentially clouding your professional judgment? Thompson stood his ground. My professional judgment is based on technical evidence and concern for soldier safety, General Miller. Evidence that would be compelling regardless of who presented it. Miller sensed vulnerability and pressed harder. Your entire career has been dedicated to increasing tank mobility, Lieutenant Colonel. A focus directly inspired by your belief that your father died because his tank lacked sufficient speed to escape an Iraqi ambush. Now suddenly, after Colonel Harmon appears, you reverse that position. Quite a coincidence. The trap was sprung, but not the one Miller intended. Thompson exchanged a glance with Harmon, receiving a subtle nod of encouragement. You're right about one thing, General Miller, Thompson said quietly. I did believe my father died because his tank was too slow. That belief shaped my career, my research focus, my approach to the XM1A5 design. He paused, his voice gaining strength. But that belief was wrong. My father didn't die because his tank lacked mobility. He died making a deliberate choice to protect his crew by maneuvering to place the strongest armor between an incoming RPG and his commander, Colonel Richard Harmon. The room fell silent as the personal dimension of the technical dispute became clear. Thompson continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. What I've learned from Colonel Harmon isn't just the truth about my father's sacrifice. It's the fundamental principle that guided that sacrifice. The protection of American soldiers takes precedence over all other considerations, a principle I had lost sight of in my pursuit of technological advancement. Thompson turned to face Miller directly. Speaking of personal connections, General, perhaps you should disclose your own relationship to the 73 Easting engagement, specifically your brigade's assigned role in providing flank security for the sector where my father's tank was hit. Miller's face drained of color. That's ancient history, irrelevant to the current discussion. Is it? Harmon challenged, stepping forward. Your brigade was tasked with securing the right flank of our advance, the same flank from which the RPG team that killed Samuel Thompson attacked. Your forces were redirected without proper notification to adjacent units, leaving that flank exposed. The revelation sent a ripple through the assembled officials. Hayes looked between Miller and Harmon, reassessing the situation with new understanding. You've carried that knowledge for 34 years, General Miller, Harmon continued. Knowledge that your tactical decision contributed to the circumstances of Samuel Thompson's death. Yet you cultivated a relationship with his son, exploiting his misunderstanding of that death to advance your company's agenda. That's enough, Colonel, Hayes intervened, his voice firm but not unsympathetic. These personal histories, while relevant to understanding the context, aren't our primary concern today. He turned to the full assembly. The technical issues raised regarding the XM1A5 protection philosophy and control architecture demand immediate attention. Hayes made his decision. I am suspending further development of the XM1A5 pending a complete technical review by an independent committee. All Arcturus systems will be subjected to comprehensive testing under realistic combat conditions, and the autonomous capabilities identified by Dr. Reynolds will be thoroughly evaluated for compliance with established Army doctrine on crew authority. Miller began to protest, but Hayes cut him off. This isn't negotiable, General. The safety of American soldiers and the integrity of our procurement process are paramount concerns. As the review adjourned, the room buzzed with urgent conversations. Pentagon civilians huddled with their staff. Arcturus executives surrounded Miller, their expressions grave. Hayes approached Thompson, Harmon, and Reynolds. You've opened a significant can of worms here, the general observed. Arcturus won't take this lying down. They have powerful allies in Congress and the defense establishment. We understand the risks, sir, Thompson replied, but the evidence demanded action. Hayes nodded. I agree, and for what it's worth, I believe your father would be proud of your decision today, Lieutenant Colonel. He turned to Harmon. Walk with me, Colonel. We have some things to discuss privately. As they left the review facility, Harmon glanced back to see Miller watching them, his expression a mixture of calculation and cold fury. The battle had been joined, but far from won. Men like Miller with wealth, power, and political connections were never more dangerous than when cornered. The coming days would test not just their evidence and arguments, but their very commitment to the principles Samuel Thompson had died defending. The protection of those who put their lives on the line for their country. The balance of the iron triangle, not just in tank design, but in the moral choices that defined a soldier's duty. General Hayes led Harmon to a small conference room adjacent to the review facility, dismissing his aides with a gesture. Once they were alone, the general's formal demeanor relaxed slightly. You've started quite the firestorm, Dick, Hayes said, using Harmon's nickname from their days serving together in Iraq. Arcturus is a major defense contractor with billions invested in the XM1A5 project. Miller will fight this with everything he has. I'm aware of the risks, Harmon replied, but the evidence couldn't be ignored. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. No, it couldn't. That's why I supported the review. But you should know what you're up against. Miller has already reached out to his allies on the Senate Armed Services Committee. There will be political pressure to reinstate the project without changes. The technical evidence is compelling, Harmon pointed out. The active protection system simply doesn't provide the protection claimed. Technical evidence doesn't always prevail in Washington, Hayes said dryly, especially when billions in contracts and thousands of jobs are at stake. Harmon recognized the warning for what it was. Hayes was supportive, but realistic about the forces aligned against them. What's your advice, General? Document everything, Hayes advised. Every test result, every discrepancy between requirements and implementation, every unauthorized capability. Make the evidence so overwhelming that even Miller's political allies can't ignore it. And Thompson? Harmon asked. His career is on the line here. Hayes smiled faintly. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson made a brave choice today. Choosing principle over career advancement isn't common in today's Army. His expression grew serious. I'll do what I can to protect him, but Miller has long arms. There may be repercussions we can't prevent. Thompson understands the risks, Harmon assured him. He's his father's son. So it seems, Hayes agreed. He paused, studying Harmon thoughtfully. You know, when Miller suggested your relationship with Thompson's father might be clouding your judgment, he wasn't entirely wrong. We all have our ghosts, Dick. The promises we make to fallen comrades. The debts we feel we can never repay. Harmon didn't deny it. Sam Thompson saved my life. Watching over his son was the least I could do. And you've done it well, Hayes acknowledged. But be careful not to let that personal connection blind you to the larger picture. This isn't just about honoring Sam's legacy or exposing Miller's hypocrisy. It's about ensuring the next generation of American tanks properly balances all aspects of the Iron Triangle. I understand the mission, sir, Harmon assured him. Good. Hayes straightened, General's demeanor returning. Because it's about to get complicated. Miller is requesting a private meeting with Thompson this afternoon, ostensibly to find common ground on the protection philosophy. Harmon frowned. That sounds like a trap. Almost certainly, Hayes agreed, but Thompson has agreed to meet him. Said something about confronting the past to secure the future. The statement was so characteristic of Samuel Thompson's son that Harmon couldn't help but smile. He really is Sam's boy. Watch his back, Colonel, Hayes advised. Miller is desperate and dangerous, and the stakes go beyond just the XM-1A5 project. What do you mean? Hayes hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. The autonomous capabilities Reynolds identified, they're part of a larger initiative within certain Pentagon circles, a push toward removing humans from battlefield decisions altogether, letting algorithms determine engagement priorities, acceptable collateral damage, even retreat versus advanced calculations. That's fundamentally contrary to Army doctrine, Harmon objected. Combat decisions require human judgment, moral assessment, contextual understanding. I agree, Hayes said, but there are powerful interests who see human operators as the weakest link in modern warfare. Too slow, too emotional, too bound by ethical constraints. His expression darkened. Arcturus isn't just supplying components for the XM-1A5, Dick. They're advancing an agenda that could fundamentally reshape American warfighting philosophy. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about tank design or procurement politics. It was about the very nature of warfare and the role of human judgment in combat decisions. Does Thompson understand what he's up against? Harmon asked. I'm not sure anyone fully does, Hayes replied, but he needs to know before he meets with Miller this afternoon. As Harmon left the meeting, his mind raced with the new information. Hayes had confirmed what they had suspected. Arcturus wasn't just building tanks. They were building a future where human judgment became increasingly irrelevant to warfare, a future Samuel Thompson would have vehemently opposed. And now his son stood at the crossroads of that conflict, preparing to confront the man who had exploited his misunderstanding of his father's death to advance that agenda. Harmon found Thompson in his office, reviewing technical specifications with Sarah Reynolds. Both looked up as he entered, immediately noting his grave expression. General Hayes shared some additional context about Arcturus's agenda, Harmon explained, closing the door behind him. Context that makes your meeting with Miller this afternoon potentially more dangerous than we realized. He outlined Hayes's revelations about the push toward algorithmic warfare, the effort to remove human judgment from combat decisions, and Arcturus's central role in that initiative. The XM-1A5 isn't just a tank, Harmon concluded. It's a beachhead for a fundamental shift in warfare philosophy, a shift that would make your father's sacrifice meaningless. Thompson absorbed this, his expression hardening. Because my father chose to sacrifice himself based on human judgment, human values, something an algorithm would never do. Exactly, Reynolds agreed. The autonomous capabilities I identified aren't just safety backups. They're the foundation for a system that could eventually replace human decision-making entirely. Which explains Miller's desperation to maintain control of the project, Thompson realized, and his willingness to exploit my misunderstanding of my father's death. He's coming to offer you something this afternoon, Harmon predicted. Probably a compromise on the protection standards, maybe even a concession on the more obvious autonomous capabilities. In exchange for dropping our objections to the core architecture, Thompson finished, allowing the fundamental shift toward algorithmic warfare to proceed unchallenged. That would be my assessment, Harmon confirmed. Thompson's jaw set in determination. Then we need to be prepared with a counteroffer, one that protects both our soldiers and the principle of human judgment in warfare. As they outlined their strategy for the coming confrontation, Harmon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The iron triangle of tank design had expanded to encompass a larger philosophical battle. A battle for the soul of American warfighting doctrine, a battle Samuel Thompson had unknowingly given his life to preserve. And his son now stood on the front line of that conflict, ready to face the man who had exploited his father's sacrifice for corporate gain. The true test of balance was about to begin. James Miller arrived at Thompson's office precisely at 1500 hours, his corporate demeanor polished to perfection. Gone was the anger from the morning's review, replaced by a calculated professionalism that Harmon recognized as far more dangerous. "Lieutenant Colonel," Miller greeted Thompson cordially, "thank you for agreeing to meet." His gaze shifted to Harmon and Reynolds. "I had hoped we might speak privately." "Colonel Harmon and Dr. Reynolds are key advisors on the XM1A5 protection review," Thompson replied smoothly. "Their presence is non-negotiable." Miller accepted this with a tight smile. "As you wish." He took the offered seat, placing a slim folder on Thompson's desk. "I've reviewed your concerns about the active protection system's performance in degraded environments. Arcturus is prepared to implement enhanced redundancy measures that would improve interception rates under all conditions." "And the conventional armor thickness?" Thompson prompted. "We could consider a moderate increase," Miller allowed, "though it would impact the mobility parameters significantly." "And the autonomous capabilities Dr. Reynolds identified?" Harmon asked. Miller's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Those capabilities represent standard safety protocols, Colonel. Nothing more sinister than ensuring the vehicle can operate if the crew is incapacitated." "Yet they were never disclosed in the requirements review," Thompson pointed out, "along with 30 other significant deviations from the approved specifications. Technical developments evolved during implementation," Miller replied dismissively. "Arcturus has been at the forefront of combat system integration for decades. Our engineers anticipate needs that requirement writers often miss." "Needs like removing human judgment from combat decisions?" Harmon challenged. For a moment, Miller's mask slipped, revealing genuine surprise. Then the corporate smile returned. "That's a rather dramatic mischaracterization of standard automation protocols, Colonel." "Is it?" Reynolds interjected. "The architecture I identified doesn't just provide backup functionality. It establishes a framework for algorithmic decision-making that could override crew judgment in progressively expanding scenarios." Miller studied her with new wariness. "Dr. Reynolds, these are complex systems with multiple redundancies. I understand the technical details might appear concerning without proper context." "The context is clear, General," Thompson said quietly. "Arcturus is using the XM1A5 project to advance capabilities that fundamentally alter the relationship between soldiers and their equipment. Capabilities that were never requested, approved, or even disclosed to the Project Oversight Committee." Miller's pretense of conciliation finally evaporated. "The future of warfare isn't going to wait for Pentagon bureaucrats to update their requirements documents, Lieutenant Colonel. While Russia and China pursue autonomous combat systems aggressively, we're supposed to hamstring ourselves with outdated notions of human control. Those outdated notions are what separate American warriors from mindless killing machines," Harmon countered. "The judgment, the moral assessment, the ability to recognize when the mission parameters no longer fit the situation on the ground." "Noble sentiments," Miller said dismissively. "But sentiment doesn't win wars, Colonel. Technical superiority does. Speed of decision-making does. And humans are the slowest, most unpredictable component in modern combat systems." "Like my father?" Thompson asked quietly. "Was his decision to sacrifice himself to save his crew too unpredictable for your algorithmic approach to warfare?" Miller's expression tightened. "Your father made a noble choice, Michael, but imagine a world where that choice wasn't necessary, where active protection systems intercepted the RPG before it threatened the tank, where networked combat systems eliminated the enemy position before they could fire." "At what cost?" Thompson pressed. "Systems that make engagement decisions without human moral judgment? that calculate acceptable collateral damage based on statistical models rather than human values. Progress always comes with adaptation, Miller argued. The longbow, the rifle, the machine gun, the tank itself, each advance changed warfare fundamentally. Each required soldiers to adapt to new realities. But none of those removed human judgment from the killing decision, Harmon pointed out. None transferred moral agency from the warrior to an algorithm. Miller leaned forward, dropping all pretense of compromise. Let me be direct. The XM1A5 project is moving forward with or without your support, Lieutenant Colonel. The political and strategic momentum behind it is unstoppable. The question is whether you want to be part of shaping that future or left behind as a footnote. Is that a threat, General? Thompson asked mildly. A reality check, Miller corrected. Your career has been built on pushing the boundaries of mobility and technology. Don't throw that away on some misguided crusade inspired by Colonel Harmon's selective recounting of your father's death. Thompson remained unmoved. My father died protecting his crew, General. A human choice an algorithm would never make. His sacrifice matters precisely because it was chosen, not calculated. And what about the sacrifices that could be prevented by superior technology, Miller countered. How many American soldiers might come home alive if we embrace the full potential of autonomous combat systems? At the cost of what makes them soldiers rather than operators of killing machines? Harmon challenged. At the cost of the moral foundation of American warfighting doctrine? Miller stood, his patience clearly exhausted. This philosophical debate is fascinating, but ultimately irrelevant. The future is coming, whether you embrace it or resist it. He fixed Thompson with a hard stare. I've made a generous offer to address your technical concerns about the protection systems. I suggest you consider it carefully before the political dimension of this dispute escalates further. After Miller departed, Thompson turned to Harmon and Reynolds. He's right about one thing, the political pressure will be intense. Arturis has allies throughout Washington. But we have the technical evidence, Reynolds pointed out, and Hayes supports the review. Hayes is one general, Thompson replied, powerful but not invincible against coordinated political pressure. Harmon considered their position. Miller's confident, but he's also desperate. The autonomous capabilities were meant to be implemented quietly, establishing a precedent for future systems. Our exposure of those capabilities threatens not just the XM1A5 contract, but Arturis's entire strategic direction. Which makes him dangerous, Thompson concluded. We need to consolidate our evidence and prepare for a prolonged battle. As they outlined their next steps, Harmon realized that the confrontation had evolved far beyond questions of tank design or procurement politics. It had become a struggle for the very soul of American warfighting doctrine. The principle that human judgment, human values, human moral agency must remain central to combat decisions, regardless of technological advancement. Samuel Thompson had given his life affirming that principle. Now his son stood ready to defend it against those who would replace human judgment with algorithmic efficiency. The balance of the Iron Triangle had never been more precarious or more essential to maintain. The tank-proving grounds at Aberdeen stretched before them like a miniature battlefield. Obstacles and target ranges designed to test every aspect of armored vehicle performance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the facility, Harmon found Michael Thompson standing alone beside the partially completed XM1A5 prototype hull. Your father would have hated it, Harmon observed, joining the younger man. Too sleek, not enough armor. He was old school that way. Thompson smiled faintly. But he would have appreciated the fire control system, the enhanced crew interfaces. He was always sketching improvements in his notebooks. He was an engineer at heart, Harmon agreed, always looking for the perfect balance of the Iron Triangle. They stood in companionable silence, the legacy of Samuel Thompson a tangible presence between them. Do you think we can win this fight? Thompson asked finally. Against Miller, Arturis, the political pressure? Harmon considered the question carefully. Winning might look different than we expect. The XM1A5 will eventually be built. Autonomous systems will continue to advance. But if we can ensure that human judgment remains the final authority, that crew protection isn't sacrificed for technological novelty. That would be a victory worth fighting for. My father's kind of victory, Thompson observed. Practical, focused on what matters most. Exactly, Harmon agreed. The prototype hull gleamed in the fading light, its sleek lines and reduced armor profile embodying the imbalance they were fighting to correct. Yet within that flawed design lay the potential for something better. something that honored Samuel Thompson's sacrifice by ensuring future tank crews would have every possible protection, both physical and doctrinal. The Iron Triangle would find its balance again. Not perfect, perhaps, but true to the principles that had guided American armored warfare since its inception. The principle that the warriors inside the steel mattered more than the technology surrounding them. As darkness fell over Aberdeen Proving Ground, Richard Harmon and Michael Thompson turned away from the prototype, walking side by side toward the challenges that awaited them. Father and son, separated by a generation but united in purpose, guided by the enduring legacy of sacrifice and duty that defined the best of American soldiers. The battle for the soul of armored warfare had just begun, and they would face it as Samuel Thompson would have wanted, with courage, with conviction, and with an unwavering commitment to the warriors who would one day trust their lives to the decisions being made today. The Iron Triangle would hold, balance would be restored, and the speed of valor would once again find its proper place in the calculus of combat. The desert air shimmered with heat as the convoy of vehicles approached the vast expanse of Yuma Proving Ground. Towering dust clouds marked their progress across the Arizona landscape, a landscape that had tested American armor for generations. In the lead Humvee, Richard Harmon watched the terrain unfold before him, mentally cataloging its features as only a veteran tank commander could. The familiar tightness gripped his chest, the phantom pain from the shrapnel he'd taken during his final deployment to Iraq in 2004. 20 years since that ambush outside Fallujah, and still his body remembered. Third Purple Heart, second closest call. The closest had been that February day in 1991 when Samuel Thompson made his fateful choice. Reminds you of Iraq, doesn't it? Michael Thompson asked from the seat beside him. Similar, Harmon acknowledged. Pushing back the memories, though nothing quite compares to combat conditions. Thompson nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. 3 weeks had passed since their confrontation with Miller at Aberdeen. 3 weeks of intense preparation for today's critical test. The test that would determine the future of American tank design for decades to come. General Hayes had managed to push through an unprecedented field demonstration, comparing the two competing XM1A5 prototypes. Miller's high-speed, reduced armor design versus the balanced alternative Harmon and Thompson had developed. The results would be witnessed by representatives from Congress, the Pentagon, and key military commands. Evidence that even Miller's political allies couldn't ignore. Status report on our prototype? Harmon asked as they neared the testing facility. Final calibration completed at 0400, Thompson replied. The integrated protection system is functioning at optimal parameters, and the modified suspension is compensating for the additional armor weight as designed. Harmon nodded approvingly. Their prototype represented a true balance of the Iron Triangle, enhanced protection without sacrificing critical mobility, advanced electronics that supported crew decision-making rather than supplanting it. And Miller's team, he asked? Thompson's expression darkened. Already on site, they've been running preliminary trials since yesterday. Apparently, their latest autonomous engagement protocols have shown impressive results. Under controlled conditions, no doubt, Harmon observed. No doubt, Thompson agreed. As they approached the main testing compound, both men fell silent, mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. Not just with Miller and Arcturus, but with the fundamental question that had driven their efforts. What balance of technology and human judgment would best protect American soldiers in the next generation of warfare? The answer would begin to emerge today beneath the unforgiving Arizona sun. The Yuma testing facility buzzed with activity. Military officials in dress uniforms mingled with civilian contractors and technical specialists. Media representatives, carefully selected for security clearance, set up equipment at designated observation points. The atmosphere combined technical precision with barely concealed tension. Harmon surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had witnessed military pageantry across 3 decades. It reminded him of the weapons demonstrations he'd attended as a young lieutenant, fresh from West Point in 1985, eager to prove himself in Cold War Germany. Before Desert Storm, before Samuel Thompson, before his life became intertwined with the evolution of American armor doctrine. His wife, Catherine, had always teased him about his tank obsession. Even during their honeymoon in Paris, he dragged her to the Musée des Blindés to see the rare German and Soviet armor specimens. She'd stuck with him through 3 combat deployments, 35 moves, and all the wounds, both physical and invisible, that came with a lifetime of service. She would have appreciated the significance of today's demonstration, understood what was truly at stake beyond the technical specifications and performance metrics. General Hayes met Harmon and Thompson as they entered the main command center, his expression grave. "Gentlemen, glad you made it." He lowered his voice. "Miller's been working the room since dawn. Several committee members are already leaning his way." "Based on what evidence?" Thompson asked. "Preliminary speed trials," Hayes explained. "Their prototype achieved 73 miles per hour on improved surfaces. Impressive enough to make an impact on observers who don't understand the trade-offs involved." "Our prototype won't match that speed," Harmon acknowledged. "But that's not the point of today's demonstration." "You'll need to make that very clear," Hayes cautioned. "Many of the observers, especially the congressional representatives, have limited technical understanding of armor dynamics." "Where's Dr. Reynolds?" Thompson asked, scanning the room. "Monitoring the final preparations for your prototype," Hayes replied. She insisted on personally verifying the protection systems. He checked his watch. "The formal briefing begins in 30 minutes. Miller will present first, then you'll have equal time." As Hayes moved away to greet arriving officials, Thompson turned to Harmon. "Ready for this?" Harmon surveyed the room, his experienced gaze noting the power dynamics at play. "I've faced worse odds with less at stake," he replied with grim humor, "though tanks are generally more straightforward than politicians." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Miller, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit that subtly evoked military styling without actual uniform elements. A practiced smile fixed on his face as he approached. "Colonel Harmon, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson." Miller's greeting was professionally cordial. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Adequate," Harmon replied neutrally. "Today's an important milestone," Miller continued smoothly. "Whatever our philosophical differences, I believe we all want what's best for America's armored forces." "Agreed," Thompson said, "which is why we're confident in the outcome of today's demonstration." Miller's smile tightened fractionally. "Confidence is admirable, but data speaks louder than conviction." He glanced toward a group of congressional representatives entering the facility. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, duty calls." As Miller moved away, Harmon noted the easy familiarity with which he greeted the politicians. "He's been cultivating those relationships for decades," he observed, "since long before he left the military for the corporate world." "We don't need to win a popularity contest," Thompson replied. "Just demonstrate the superior protection capabilities of our design under realistic conditions." Harmon nodded, though he understood better than most that military procurement decisions were rarely determined by technical merit alone. Politics, economics, and personal influence all shaped the outcome. Today's demonstration would provide evidence, but the battle would continue long afterward in Pentagon offices and congressional committees. He recalled a hard lesson from his time as battalion commander in Iraq, when his unit had received the hastily deployed M114 up-armored Humvees instead of the more effective MRAP vehicles his soldiers desperately needed. Political influence and production contracts had trumped battlefield requirements then. The scars from those decisions, both physical and emotional, remained with him to this day. As if reading his thoughts, Thompson added, "One battle at a time, Colonel. Today we focus on proving what the Iron Triangle looks like when properly balanced." A voice over the facility's announcement system called all participants to the briefing theater. The formal presentation would begin the day's proceedings, setting the context for the field demonstrations to follow. The battle for the soul of American armor was about to commence. The briefing theater filled quickly with military officials, congressional representatives, and technical specialists. At the front, a large display screen showed the two competing XM1A5 prototypes side by side. Miller's sleek, low-profile design contrasting with the more robust, conventional silhouette of Thompson and Harmon's alternative. Sarah Reynolds slipped into the seat beside Harmon, her expression focused but confident. "Systems check complete on our prototype," she whispered. "Martinez, Chen, and Williams are prepped and ready." Harmon nodded approvingly. The crew selection had been his responsibility, selecting veterans with both technical expertise and combat experience. Staff Sergeant Juan Martinez had served under Harmon in Iraq, a skilled gunner with 2 Silver Stars for valor. Sergeant Emily Chen was a technical prodigy, her understanding of complex electronic warfare systems unmatched in the Corps. And Specialist Michael Williams had been a NASCAR mechanic before joining the Army, his intuitive grasp of engineering principles proving invaluable during the prototype development. General Hayes opened the proceedings with a brief introduction, emphasizing the historic importance of the day's demonstration. The next generation of American main battle tanks will shape our armored warfare doctrine for decades to come, he concluded. Today's comparative testing will provide critical data for that decision-making process. Miller took the podium first, commanding the room with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to corporate boardrooms and military briefings. His presentation was polished, persuasive, laden with impressive performance metrics and sleek graphics. Mobility is the new armor, he declared confidently. In tomorrow's battlefield, speed and agility, combined with superior situational awareness and active protection systems, provide more effective crew protection than traditional passive armor. The video displays showed Miller's prototype executing high-speed maneuvers, avoiding simulated threats through rapid movement rather than absorbing hits. The congressional representatives seemed particularly impressed by footage of the tank and achieving its record-breaking speed on improved surfaces. Our advanced autonomous systems provide unprecedented threat response capabilities, Miller continued. Target acquisition, threat assessment, and countermeasure deployment all occur at machine speed, eliminating the delays inherent in human reaction time. He carefully avoided explicit mentions of the system's ability to override crew decisions, framing the autonomous capabilities as enhanced crew support and emergency backup systems. To the uninitiated, it sounded like logical progression rather than a fundamental paradigm shift. Miller concluded with a direct appeal to American strategic interests. Our adversaries are rapidly advancing their own armored capabilities. The question before us is whether America will lead the next evolution of armored warfare or be forced to follow others' innovations. The applause was substantial as Miller yielded the podium. He had presented a compelling vision of technological superiority, one that resonated with American pride and competitive spirit. Thompson rose next, approaching the presentation with the methodical precision of an engineer rather than the flourish of a corporate executive. His slides contained fewer dramatic visuals and more technical specifications, though he opened with something unexpected: a photograph of his father beside an M1A1 Abrams in Desert Storm. 34 years ago, my father gave his life protecting his crew during the Battle of 73 Easting, Thompson began, his voice steady and clear. He made a human decision, based on values no algorithm could calculate, to place himself between an incoming threat and his fellow soldiers. The personal opening captured attention in a way technical specifications could not. Thompson smoothly transitioned to the core of his presentation. The iron triangle of tank design has always balanced firepower, protection, and mobility, he explained. What's changed isn't the fundamental principle of that balance, but the technologies we can employ to achieve it. Thompson's slides shifted to show comparative protection data, demonstrating how their prototype maintains superior crew survivability across multiple threat scenarios. Our design incorporates advanced active protection systems similar to our competitors, he acknowledged. But we view these as supplements to, not replacements for, conventional armor protection. He addressed the mobility question directly. Yes, our prototype is slower, achieving a maximum speed of 58 miles per hour on improved surfaces compared to 73. But in actual combat conditions, across varied terrain under enemy fire, the practical mobility difference narrows significantly while the protection advantage remains constant. Reynolds leaned toward Harmon. He's doing well, she whispered. The committee members are engaged. Harmon nodded, though he noted that several of the congressional representatives were exchanging skeptical glances. The visceral appeal of Miller's high-tech, high-speed approach remained powerful. Technical realities very rarely generated the same enthusiasm as visions of technological supremacy. Thompson concluded with a principle rather than a performance metric. When active systems fail, when electronics are compromised, when the unexpected occurs, as it inevitably does in combat, conventional armor becomes the final line of defense between American soldiers and enemy fire. Our design preserves that defense without sacrificing the advantages of advanced technology. The applause for Thompson's presentation was respectful, but more reserved than Miller's had received. As the briefing concluded and participants prepared to move to the field demonstration area, Harmon intercepted Thompson. Well presented, he said, especially the opening. Your father would have been proud. Thompson nodded, though concern lined his face. Miller's presentation was effective. Did you notice how carefully he avoided mentioning the autonomous override capabilities? I noticed, Harmon confirmed. He's presenting the system as crew support rather than crew replacement. Technically accurate, but fundamentally misleading. Will the field demonstration expose the difference? Thompson wondered. If we've designed the test scenarios properly, Harmon replied, real-world conditions have a way of revealing truths that controlled presentations can hide. Major Taylor Jackson, the Army's chief test engineer for the program, joined their conversation. A career officer with 20 years in armor development, Jackson had initially been skeptical of their concerns about Miller's design, but had gradually shifted toward their position as evidence mounted. The test protocols are locked in, Jackson assured them. No last-minute modifications or cherry-picked scenarios. Both prototypes face identical challenges with identical assessment parameters. Miller's team has been running preliminary trials since yesterday, Thompson noted. Any observations? Jackson's expression turned thoughtful. Their speed metrics are impressive, he acknowledged, but I noticed something concerning in the system responses during the simulated emergencies. The autonomous protocols seem to prioritize mission continuation over crew safety in several instances. Documented? Harmon asked. Fully, Jackson confirmed, though I doubt Miller included those data points in his presentation. As they emerged into the bright Arizona sunlight, Sarah Reynolds rejoined them, her expression urgent. We may have a problem, she said quietly. I've been monitoring the autonomous protocols in Miller's prototype during preliminary tests. They've made significant modifications since Aberdeen. What kind of modifications? Thompson asked. Enhanced decision trees, expanded autonomous engagement parameters, Reynolds explained. The system is more aggressive in assuming control from the human operators, especially in multi-threat scenarios. Can you prove this? Harmon asked. Reynolds nodded. I've documented the protocol changes. They weren't disclosed in the technical briefing materials as required. Another example of Miller implementing capabilities without proper oversight, Thompson observed grimly. More importantly, Reynolds continued, these changes make their system more likely to appear successful in today's demonstration, even while increasing the long-term risks of removing human judgment from combat decisions. Harmon considered this information as they reached the observation area overlooking the vast testing grounds. Both prototype tanks were now positioned at the starting point of the demonstration course, their distinctive silhouettes reflecting their competing design philosophies. The observation stands were already filling with official witnesses. Keep monitoring their systems during the demonstration, he instructed Reynolds. Document any autonomous decisions their prototype makes, especially any that override or preempt crew input. Reynolds nodded and moved toward the technical monitoring station where her team of engineers had established real-time data collection. The group included Dr. Wei Chen, a former DARPA researcher who had become increasingly concerned about autonomous weapon systems, and Captain Rebecca Garcia, whose background in ethical AI development made her particularly sensitive to the implications of Miller's technology. Thompson watched Reynolds go, then turned to Harmon. This isn't just about tank design anymore, is it? He asked quietly. It never was, Harmon replied. Your father understood that the most important component in any weapon system isn't the technology, but the human values guiding its use. That's what Miller's vision threatens, and that's what we're really fighting to preserve. They joined the observers at the demonstration field, where the two competing visions of America's armored future awaited their trial by fire. The test course at Yuma had been specifically designed to evaluate the competing prototypes under varied conditions. Beginning with basic mobility trials on improved surfaces, it would progress through increasingly difficult terrain challenges before culminating in simulated combat scenarios using sophisticated target acquisition and threat simulation systems. Harmon stood with Thompson in the observation area as General Hayes explained the demonstration protocols to the assembled officials. Both prototype tanks would run identical courses, with performance measured against established metrics for speed, maneuverability, target acquisition, and threat response. Miller's prototype will demonstrate first, Hayes announced, followed by Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's alternative design. The sleek, low-profile tank designated XM1A5A rolled to the starting position, its reduced armor profile evident even from a distance. Miller stood nearby with his development team, confidence evident in his posture. Begin mobility assessment phase, Hayes instructed. Miller's prototype accelerated impressively, demonstrating the speed advantage that formed the core of his protection philosophy. On the smooth demonstration track, it achieved velocity that would have been impossible for previous generation tanks, drawing appreciative murmurs from the congressional representatives. Impressive, one congressman remarked to his colleague within Harmon's hearing. Like watching the future unfold before us. Harmon remained silent, knowing that raw speed on improved surfaces represented perhaps the least relevant metric for actual combat performance. The real test would come in the later phases. His mind drifted to another demonstration, 20 years earlier in the early days of the Iraq War. He had watched a new counter-IED system perform flawlessly under controlled conditions, only to fail catastrophically in the chaotic reality of combat. 7 soldiers from his battalion had paid for that discrepancy with their lives. Their names remained etched in his memory: Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, Foster, Patel, Jackson, Nguyen. He carried their dog tags even now, a personal memorial and a reminder of the true cost of technological overconfidence. After completing the basic mobility demonstration, Miller's prototype proceeded to the obstacle course phase, navigating a series of terrain challenges designed to test maneuverability under adverse conditions. Here, the speed advantage diminished somewhat, though the tank still performed admirably. Major Jackson approached Harmon with a data tablet. First phase metrics, he explained, displaying comparative performance charts. Their mobility advantage diminishes to 22% on moderate terrain, likely to drop further on severe obstacles. And the power consumption, Harmon asked, knowing that high-performance engines often sacrificed efficiency for peak output. Up 34% from baseline, Jackson confirmed. Operational range would be significantly compromised in actual deployment conditions. Make sure the congressional representatives understand those trade-offs, Harmon suggested. Raw speed makes for impressive demonstrations, but combat endurance decides actual battles. Jackson nodded and moved to brief several of the Pentagon officials who would ultimately influence the procurement decision. Now for the combat simulation phase, Hayes announced. The prototype will engage multiple simulated threats while maneuvering through contested terrain. This represented the most realistic test of the competing protection philosophies. Miller's prototype entered the simulated battlefield, where computer-controlled targeting systems would register hits from various threat emulators placed throughout the course. Initially, the high-speed approach seemed effective. The prototype rapidly maneuvered between cover positions, its active protection system intercepting several simulated incoming projectiles. Sergeant Emily Chen, monitoring the electronic warfare aspects of the demonstration, frowned at her readouts. "Colonel Thompson," she called, gesturing him to her monitoring station. "Their autonomous systems are making engagement decisions without crew input. 3 distinct instances in the past 40 seconds. Can you record and highlight those instances?" Thompson asked. "Already done," Chen confirmed. "And there's something else. The system prioritized targeting a simulated infantry position over an anti-tank threat that posed greater danger to the vehicle, a calculation no human commander would make." Thompson exchanged a significant glance with Harmon. This was precisely the kind of algorithmic decision-making they had warned against, technically optimal by certain parameters, but fundamentally flawed from a tactical and ethical standpoint. Then came the scenario Harmon and Thompson had specifically designed to test the limits of the active protection system, a simulated ambush with multiple simultaneous threats from different angles, the kind of scenario Samuel Thompson had faced in Iraq. As the prototype entered the designated zone, targeting systems activated from multiple positions. The active protection system engaged, attempting to intercept the simulated threats, but the volume and angle of attack overwhelmed its capabilities. Multiple hits registered, the assessment system announced mechanically. Critical protection failure on right flank and turret roof. Simulated catastrophic damage to crew compartment and primary systems. A murmur ran through the observers. Under realistic combat conditions, Miller's prototype had failed its primary mission, protecting its crew. Dr. Wei Chen studied the failure data with professional interest. "Interesting," he noted. "The autonomous systems attempted to prioritize movement over interception, leaving critical angles exposed. A human crew would likely have chosen different tactical positioning." "Exactly the point," Harmon agreed. "Algorithms optimize for programmed parameters. Humans adapt to evolving conditions based on experience and contextual understanding." Miller's expression tightened, though he maintained his professional composure. "An unlikely scenario," he remarked to those nearby, "and one where any tank design would face similar challenges." Captain Rebecca Garcia, who had served as a tank commander in Afghanistan, couldn't contain her professional objection. "With respect, sir," she addressed Miller directly, "that's precisely the kind of complex ambush scenario we faced repeatedly in Kandahar province. Unlikely in conventional warfare, perhaps, but common in asymmetric conflicts." Several military officers nodded in agreement, their combat experience recognizing the validity of the test scenario despite Miller's dismissal. Hayes allowed the assessment data to display on the large monitors before continuing. We will now proceed with testing of the alternative prototype designated XM1A5B. Thompson's tank took the starting position. From the beginning, the differences in philosophy were evident. Its acceleration was slower, its profile more substantial, its movement more deliberate. Not exactly inspiring, one congressional aide commented, loud enough to be heard. Harmon smiled faintly. The initial impression was precisely what he had expected. Traditional protection rarely generated the same visceral excitement as cutting-edge speed. The real demonstration would come in the combat phase. Staff Sergeant Juan Martinez, positioned in the prototype's gunner seat, maintained constant communication with his crew as they navigated the course. A veteran of 3 combat deployments, Martinez understood the practical realities of armored warfare beyond theoretical models and simulations. Entering rough terrain segment, he reported, suspension performing within optimal parameters, hull integrity maintained despite increased stress factors. Thompson's prototype completed the mobility assessment with respectable, if unspectacular, results. Its speed topped out at 58 miles per hour on improved surfaces, significantly below Miller's 73. But as the tank moved to the obstacle course, the performance gap narrowed. The enhanced suspension system and balanced weight distribution allowed for controlled navigation through difficult terrain with minimal speed reduction. Note the consistent performance across varied conditions, Thompson explained to the observers. Combat rarely occurs on ideal surfaces. Then came the critical combat simulation phase. Thompson's prototype entered the battlefield using more traditional tactics: deliberate movement, optimal positioning, disciplined engagement protocols. The active protection system intercepted threats where possible, but the design didn't rely on technological perfection. Specialist Michael Williams, serving as driver, used his racing background to maximize the tank's performance without sacrificing stability or protection. Approaching ambush zone, he reported, maintaining tactical positioning as directed. When the prototype entered the ambush zone, the same multiple threats activated. The active protection system engaged several incoming simulated projectiles, but, like Miller's design, couldn't intercept all simultaneous threats. The difference came in what happened next. Hits registered on frontal armor and turret face, the assessment system announced. No penetration, crew compartment integrity maintained, primary systems operational. The conventional armor had absorbed impacts that the active protection system couldn't prevent, preserving crew survivability despite the technological limitations. It was the iron triangle in perfect demonstration: balanced protection when technology alone proved insufficient. Maintaining offensive capabilities, Martinez reported. All weapon systems functional despite multiple impacts. Chen's analysis team exchanged satisfied nods. Perfect illustration of defense in depth, one engineer remarked. Multiple protective layers providing redundancy when primary systems are compromised. Hayes allowed the comparative results to display side by side on the monitoring screens. The difference was stark and undeniable. Under the most challenging conditions, Thompson's design had preserved crew survival, while Miller's had failed catastrophically. This concludes the planned demonstration phases, Hayes announced. We will now proceed to an additional scenario designed to test emergency response capabilities under extreme conditions. This was the phase Harmon had most carefully designed, based on his extensive combat experience. It would simulate mechanical failure during combat, forcing both prototypes to demonstrate their response to unexpected emergencies. Miller's team returned their prototype to the starting position, repairs and adjustments made following the simulated combat damage. Thompson's team did the same, though their tank had suffered no critical failures during the previous test. The emergency scenario begins now, Hayes declared. Both prototypes will navigate the course while simulated mechanical failures are introduced at random intervals. The 2 tanks began moving through the demonstration field, each monitored by sophisticated diagnostic systems that would register the simulated failures and assess crew response. Halfway through the course, the first emergency was triggered. Engine compartment fire simulation activated, the assessment system announced. Miller's prototype responded instantly, autonomous systems engaging fire suppression and executing a textbook emergency protocol. The response was perfect, technically flawless. Autonomous protocol executing without crew input, Chen noted, monitoring the data stream. system prioritizing fire suppression over tactical positioning. When the same emergency was triggered in Thompson's prototype, the response was different. Martinez quickly assessed the situation, coordinating with Williams and Chen to execute a response that balanced immediate safety needs with tactical awareness. Fire suppression engaged, Martinez reported, maintaining defensive positioning while addressing emergency. Note the tactical awareness, Harmon pointed out to nearby observers, addressing the emergency without compromising battlefield position or creating additional vulnerabilities. Similar patterns emerged with each simulated emergency. Miller's autonomous systems provided technically optimal responses based on pre-programmed parameters. Thompson's human crew demonstrated the adaptability and contextual judgment that no algorithm could fully replicate. The demonstration appeared to be proceeding as planned until an unexpected development occurred during the final phase. As Miller's prototype navigated a particularly challenging section of terrain, a genuine mechanical failure occurred, not a simulation, but an actual malfunction in the propulsion system. Black smoke billowed from the engine compartment as the tank ground to a halt in an exposed position on the course. Warning systems activated, but the autonomous emergency protocols seemed confused by the combination of actual failure and simulated scenario parameters. This is not part of the demonstration, Hayes clarified for the observers. Technical team to respond to actual mechanical failure. Inside Miller's prototype, the crew struggled to regain control from autonomous systems that were executing contradictory protocols. Captain Alexei Petrov, a skilled tank commander serving as test operator, found himself fighting his own vehicle's decision-making algorithms. System override not responding, he reported urgently over the emergency channel. Autonomous protocols have locked out manual fire suppression. Temperature rising in crew compartment. The severity of the situation became apparent to all observers as the smoke thickened and the first visible flames appeared at the engine access panels. The technical response team was still mobilizing, precious seconds ticking by as the emergency escalated. Before the support team could reach Miller's disabled prototype, Thompson's tank broke from its assigned course, moving rapidly toward the stricken vehicle. Martinez had made an instant decision upon hearing Petrov's emergency call. Moving to assist, Martinez announced, as Williams expertly maneuvered their tank into position between the disabled vehicle and the simulated threat zones, effectively shielding it with their own superior armor. "What are they doing?" Reynolds asked, watching the unexpected deviation from test protocols. "Being soldiers," Harmon replied simply. Chen activated the prototype's external fire suppression system, designed for clearing obstacles but now repurposed to help contain the growing fire in Miller's vehicle. Meanwhile, Martinez coordinated with the approaching technical team, providing tactical cover for their emergency response. The action was unexpected, unscripted, a human decision made in the moment. Exactly the kind of moral choice no autonomous system could have calculated. Harmon watched with quiet pride as the crew executed a textbook emergency response, prioritizing the safety of fellow soldiers over test protocols or performance metrics. It reminded him of another rescue operation, 2 decades earlier outside Baghdad, when his tank crew had risked their lives to extract a disabled Bradley fighting vehicle under enemy fire. 3 Bronze Stars had resulted from that action, but more importantly, 8 soldiers had returned home who might otherwise have been lost. As technical teams rushed to address the actual fire in Miller's prototype, Thompson's tank maintained its protective position, crew prioritizing the safety of their competitors over the demonstration parameters. It was a small moment, unplanned and genuine, but it resonated with every combat veteran present in a way no technical specification could match. "That's the difference," a veteran Army colonel remarked nearby. "No algorithm would have made that choice. No autonomous system would prioritize protecting a competitor at the risk of compromising its own mission parameters." When both prototypes were recovered and the immediate situation secured, Hayes called a brief recess before the final assessment discussion. The observers broke into small groups, comparing notes and impressions from the demonstration. Captain Petrov, still visibly shaken from the experience, approached Martinez and his crew as they exited their prototype. "Thank you," he said simply, extending his hand. "When the autonomous systems locked us out of manual control, I wasn't sure we'd get out in time." "Never leave a fellow tanker behind," Martinez replied, clasping the offered hand. "Doesn't matter what patch you wear or which prototype you're driving." Harmon found Thompson standing somewhat apart from the others, watching the recovery vehicles towing Miller's damaged prototype back to the maintenance area. That wasn't in the test plan, Harmon observed, nodding toward Thompson's tank. No, Thompson agreed. That was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's decision. When he saw the actual fire, he didn't hesitate. Your father would have done the same, Harmon said quietly. Thompson nodded. That's the point, isn't it? The decision to protect others, even at potential cost to oneself, something no autonomous system would ever prioritize. The most effective demonstration we could have hoped for, Harmon agreed, though not one we could have planned. As they spoke, they noticed Miller approaching, his normally immaculate appearance somewhat disheveled by the emergency response. His expression combined professional concern with barely concealed frustration. An unfortunate technical issue, he acknowledged, though I appreciate your crew's response. Basic soldier instinct, Thompson replied. Protect your comrades, regardless of other considerations. Miller's jaw tightened at the implicit contrast with his autonomous systems philosophy. A noble sentiment, though in actual combat, such deviations from mission parameters could compromise broader objectives. Perhaps, Harmon interjected, but they preserve the humanity that separates warriors from weapons. Something your autonomous systems can't replicate, no matter how sophisticated their algorithms. Harmon thought of his own battlefield decisions over the years, some technically suboptimal by pure efficiency metrics, but morally necessary. The time his company had delayed a critical advance to evacuate Afghan civilians caught in the crossfire. The night his platoon had shared their limited supplies with displaced refugees despite mission protocols. The countless small choices that maintained humanity amidst the brutality of combat. Before Miller could respond, General Hayes called the group back to order for the final assessment discussion. The congressional representatives and military officials gathered in a semicircle as Hayes summarized the demonstration results. Today's testing has provided valuable data regarding the competing protection philosophies, Hayes began diplomatically. Both prototypes demonstrated strengths and limitations under varied conditions. He proceeded to outline the comparative performance metrics, emphasizing the critical differences in crew survivability under the most challenging scenarios. The data clearly indicates that while the XM1A5A prototype demonstrated superior speed and initial maneuverability, the XM1A5B design provided significantly enhanced crew protection when active systems were overwhelmed or compromised. Miller stepped forward. With respect, General, today's demonstration included scenarios specifically designed to disadvantage active protection systems in favor of conventional armor. In real-world conditions, with properly functioning systems, in real-world combat, Harmon interrupted, systems fail, electronics are compromised, the unexpected occurs with regularity. Any design philosophy that doesn't account for those realities places crews at unnecessary risk. To emphasize his point, Harmon removed a tattered photograph from his wallet, a tank crew in Iraq, standing proudly before their M1A2. This was Alpha Company, 2nd Platoon, 2004. 4 days after this photo was taken, their active countermeasure system failed during an ambush. 5 of these men survived only because of the conventional armor backing up the electronic systems. Captain Garcia nodded emphatically. We experienced similar failures in Afghanistan. Dust, extreme temperatures, enemy electronic countermeasures, all degraded our active systems. Passive armor was often the difference between casualties and fatalities. Hayes nodded. Colonel Harmon's point is well taken. Combat history consistently demonstrates that redundant protection, layers that function even when primary systems fail, proves essential to crew survival. The senior Pentagon representative, a civilian with oversight of acquisition programs, joined the discussion. The speed advantages of Miller's design are undeniable. Perhaps there's a middle ground that incorporates the best elements of both approaches. Thompson sees the opening. That's precisely what our design attempts to achieve. We've incorporated advanced active protection systems while maintaining conventional armor as a critical backup. The iron triangle balanced rather than skewed toward a single attribute. The congressional representatives exchanged thoughtful glances. Their earlier enthusiasm for Miller's sleek, high-tech approach, tempered by the undeniable survival advantage Thompson's design had demonstrated. There's another factor we haven't directly addressed, Hayes added. The philosophical question of human judgment versus autonomous systems in combat decisions. Miller recognized the shift in momentum and attempted to reframe the issue. Our autonomous capabilities are designed to support crew decision-making, not replace it. They provide enhanced response options when human reaction time would be insufficient. Yet your systems are designed with progressively expanding parameters for autonomous operation, Reynolds interjected, joining the discussion with technical documentation in hand. Parameters that could eventually minimize or override human judgment in critical combat decisions. Enhanced capabilities that have never been requested, approved, or properly vetted through established Army doctrinal review, Thompson added. Capabilities that represent a fundamental shift in the relationship between soldiers and their equipment. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her technical expertise lending weight to the argument. The autonomous protocols we observed during today's demonstration made multiple decisions that prioritize mission objectives over crew safety. In at least 3 instances, the system overrode crew input to maintain attack positioning despite increasing vulnerability. Captain Petrov, still visibly shaken from his experience in the malfunctioning prototype, nodded confirmation. When the actual emergency occurred, the autonomous systems locked us out of manual control. The conflict between emergency protocols and combat algorithms created a dangerous paralysis. The senior military officials exchanged concerned glances. This aspect of the debate touched on core principles of American warfighting philosophy, principles that transcended technical specifications or performance metrics. Major Jackson presented the final technical assessment. The data is conclusive. In moderate to severe combat conditions, Thompson's balanced design provided 72% greater crew survivability with only 18% reduced mobility compared to Miller's high-speed approach. The trade-off clearly favors protection over pure speed. Hayes took control of the discussion again. Based on today's demonstration and the technical evidence presented, I am recommending that further development of the XM1A5 proceed based on Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's balanced design philosophy, with appropriate refinements and optimizations, of course. Miller's expression remained professionally neutral, though his eyes betrayed his frustration. General, with respect, this decision requires broader consideration than a single day's demonstration. The strategic implications, the technological advantages at stake, will be thoroughly evaluated through proper channels, Hayes finished firmly, including a comprehensive review of all autonomous capabilities and their alignment with established Army doctrine regarding human judgment in combat decisions. The congressional representatives, recognizing the military consensus forming, began to align themselves accordingly. Politics followed military expertise in this instance, particularly when crew protection and American values could be cited as motivating factors. As the formal assessment concluded and the group dispersed, Miller approached Thompson one final time, his corporate mask momentarily lowered to reveal the hard-edged general beneath. "This isn't over, Lieutenant Colonel," he said quietly. "Arcturus has invested billions in autonomous combat systems. We have supporters throughout Washington and the Pentagon. One demonstration won't change the direction of military technology evolution." "Perhaps not," Thompson acknowledged, "but it's established a precedent for balance rather than blind technological pursuit, for preserving human judgment in combat decisions rather than surrendering it to algorithms." "A temporary setback," Miller insisted. "The future is coming, whether traditionalists like Harmon accept it or not." "The future always comes, General," Harmon interjected, joining them. "The question is whether it serves our values or undermines them, whether it honors sacrifices like Samuel Thompson's or renders them meaningless." Miller's expression hardened at the reference. Samuel Thompson died because he lacked the technology that could have saved him. Technology your sentimentality would deny to the next generation of American soldiers. "My father died making a human choice," Thompson corrected firmly. "A moral decision no algorithm would ever make. His sacrifice wasn't a failure of technology, but an affirmation of the values that define American warriors." Sergeant Martinez approached, still in his tank crew uniform, battle-worn and oil-stained from the emergency response. "Begging your pardon, sirs," he said with quiet authority. "The men and women who serve in these vehicles aren't looking for technology to replace their judgment. They want systems that enhance their capabilities while respecting their humanity." Miller studied them all for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. "This conversation will continue in Washington," he said finally, "where practical considerations typically outweigh philosophical idealism." As Miller departed to join his corporate team, Harmon, Thompson, and Martinez watched him go, understanding that today's victory, while significant, represented just one battle in a longer war for the soul of American armored warfare. "He's right about Washington," Harmon observed. "Politics and procurement have their own momentum, often independent of battlefield realities. Then we'll make our case there as well, Thompson replied with quiet determination. For balanced design, for human judgment, for the principles my father gave his life to uphold. Dr. Reynolds joined them with the rest of the technical team, their expressions reflecting cautious optimism. The data from today's demonstration is undeniable, she noted. Even Miller's political allies will struggle to dismiss the survival metrics. Hayes approached, having overheard the exchange. You've won an important round today, gentlemen. The data from this demonstration will be difficult for even Miller's political allies to dismiss. But the larger questions remain, Harmon noted. How much control we surrender to autonomous systems, how we balance technology with human judgment. Questions as old as warfare itself, Hayes acknowledged. Each generation faces them in new forms, with new technologies and new temptations. As the Arizona sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the testing grounds, the various participants began departing for their scheduled flights back to Washington, Aberdeen, and corporate headquarters across the country. The formal report would be compiled over the coming days, recommendations formalized, and the bureaucratic process of military procurement would resume its glacial pace. Martinez and his crew completed their final maintenance checks on the prototype before joining the gathering. Williams still carried a wrench in his hand, his mechanic's instincts never quite satisfied. Chen had her tablet filled with performance data she continued to analyze even now. Thank you, Thompson said to the crew, not just for your technical performance today, but for that moment of humanity when it mattered most. Nothing special, sir, Martinez replied modestly. Any tank crew would have done the same. That's precisely the point, Harmon noted, the human element that no algorithm can replicate. Harmon gazed at the two prototype tanks that represented competing visions of America's military future. One sleek and swift, prioritizing technological superiority over human judgment. The other balanced and resilient, preserving the moral core of warfare amid advancing technology. He thought of all the tanks he had commanded over his long career. The M60A3 in Germany during the Cold War, still bearing the legacy of World War II design philosophy. The M1A1 in Desert Storm, where Samuel Thompson had made his fateful choice. The M1A2 in Iraq, with its enhanced electronics that sometimes helped and sometimes hindered. Each generation bringing new capabilities, new challenges, new questions about the proper balance between human and machine. Your father would be proud, he said to Thompson, not just of the tank design, but of your willingness to stand for the principles that mattered to him. Thompson nodded, emotion briefly visible in his eyes. The iron triangle in balance, he said softly, in tank design and in life. The crew gathered their gear and headed toward the transport vehicles that would return them to base housing. Reynolds and her technical team followed, already discussing refinements to the prototype based on the day's performance data. Hayes lingered with Harmon and Thompson as the testing ground gradually emptied. What happens now? Thompson asked. The bureaucratic battle begins, Hayes replied frankly. Reports, committees, congressional hearings. Miller has powerful allies and substantial resources, but he also has a demonstrated failure of his core design philosophy that can't be easily dismissed. And the autonomous capabilities? Harmon pressed. The attempt to remove human judgment from combat decisions? That's the larger fight, Hayes acknowledged. One that extends far beyond tank design to the fundamental nature of American warfighting doctrine. A fight that will require allies from across the services and ethical technology community. As they walked toward the command center, where the detailed assessment reports would be compiled and the official recommendations formalized, Harmon thought about the legacy he had helped preserve. Not just Samuel Thompson's personal sacrifice, but the enduring principle it represented, that human judgment, human values, human moral agency must remain central to combat decisions, regardless of technological advancement. Samuel Thompson had given his life affirming that principle. Now his son would carry forward the legacy of balanced judgment, of moral courage, of putting protection above all other considerations when lives were at stake. The three men turned toward the command center as the last rays of sunlight gilded the desert landscape. Behind them, the two prototypes stood in silent testimony to the eternal struggle between technological advancement and human values, between efficiency and moral judgment, between speed and protection. The next generation of American armor would emerge from that struggle, shaped not just by engineering calculations, but by the enduring legacy of warriors like Samuel Thompson. Warriors who understood that the ultimate purpose of any weapon system was not just to win battles, but to preserve the humanity of those who fought them. In the gathering twilight of Yuma Proving Ground, Richard Harmon felt a sense of completion, of promises fulfilled and debts honored. Samuel Thompson's sacrifice had not been in vain. His son would carry forward the legacy of balanced judgment, of moral courage, of putting protection above all other considerations when lives were at stake. The Iron Triangle had found its balance again, in armor design and in the souls of those who commanded it.